west of there, 150 miles. Only 2 weeks later, was over 200 cars. They're longer, they're heavier, they're more dangerous. So remember when you hear about supposed, quote, remember that when you hear about meaningfully improved safety. We've heard over the past month, and Mr. Jeffries will repeat today, that 99.9% of rail hazmat shipments reach their destinations without releasing toxic waste. I'd urge him to talk to Ms. Allison and others whom I've gotten to know in East Palestine about how it feels to be that 0.1%. Ask her if she thinks that record is something to brag about. Railroads refuse to support new rules for trains that carry dangerous, hazardous material like the vinyl chloride that burned in Ohio. They've cut the amount of time their carmen are given to inspect each rail car to less than a minute. The railroads have often argued against increasing fines for safety violations. Of course they have. In most recent fiscal year available, Norfolk Southern had 579 violations in the cases that have been closed. They paid an average fine of less than $3,300. You heard that right, not $30 million, not $3 million, just over $3,000. The largest fine Norfolk Southern paid that year was just over $25,000. The company, keep in mind, planned to spend $3.4 billion on stock buyback. It really is a rounding error. Finally, the railroads are fighting the most basic of all requirements, having 2 crew members in a train. If you ask 50 people outside anywhere, how many people you think work on those trains that are 200 cars long or that are 2 or 3 miles long? You'd hear people say 5, 10, 20. The railroads want only 1 person working on a train that's 2 or 3 miles long. That's frankly crazy. Earlier this month, Norfolk Southern issued a 6-point plan of modest safety improvements. We don't need a voluntary plan. We need the Brown-Vance bill. We need safety rules. We need the Railway Safety Act. Our bill is a common-sense, bipartisan plan. Senator Vance and I are both here today to urge this committee to embrace the obvious need for safety reform. It shouldn't, Madam Chair, Senator Cruz, it shouldn't take a train derailment for elected officials to put partisanship aside and work together for the people whom we serve, not corporations like Norfolk Southern. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Brown, and thank you for accentuating this one point that is a trend change that I don't think people have fully digested, is the length of trains has significantly changed. And so I think it proposes definitely new challenges. Senator Vance, thank you. Look forward to your comments and appreciate your work on this legislation.
Great. So thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ranking Member Cruz, for both of your engagement with this issue. Thanks to Senator Brown for his partnership on this issue. Appreciate it. Appreciate you being here before the Commerce Committee. I want to thank all of our guests here, both during this panel and the next panel. But I in particular want to thank Ms. Allison for being here. I read your testimony this morning, and I won't reveal what's in it because I don't want to give anything away. But let me just say that I'm sorry this happened. And as the father of 3 kids under the age of 6, I was particularly affected by some of the ways this has affected your children. And the only thing I'd ask you, Ms. Allison, because you've already done so much with your activism, and I appreciate that, is that, always treat our office as an open door. If there's more that we could be doing, I would like to be doing it. I am a new senator. You don't always see everything that's happening. And the thing that I'd ask is if you think we could be doing more, just come and tell us because we'll try to do that. So look forward to your testimony. But let me just sort of address a couple of issues related to the Railway Safety Act. I have heard a couple of general complaints and a couple of specific complaints about the legislation from industry groups, from alleged conservative activists, and I would like to address them in broad strokes here and then address one specific consideration and then finally suggest a way we might be able to deal with this bill and this legislation in the future. So the most outrageous and the most ridiculous thing that I've heard from industry groups and other activists in response to this bill is that it's somehow a kind of Bolshevism to require the railways to engage in proper safety standards, that this bill is a big government solution to the railway safety problem. It is funny that complaint comes from a group that came before this body 3 months ago begging for a bailout from their labor dispute. And while I'm on that topic, by the way, thank you, Ranking Member Cruz, for your leadership on that issue in particular. But you cannot, on the one hand, beg the government to bail you out of a labor dispute 3 months ago and then say that it's big government to have proper safety standards in the way that you conduct your railroads. It's a ridiculous argument. It doesn't pass the smell test. And the fact that they advance that argument in their op-eds and their paid-for activism is insulting to the people of East Palestine, and it's insulting to the intelligence of the members of this committee. Let me offer a specific pushback to a criticism. One of the things that I've heard in response to our legislation is that it actually has nothing to do with what happened in East Palestine. Well, that is an interesting observation, and it's something that I'd love them to go to East Palestine and say themselves. Say it to the firefighters who went into a chemical fire without proper hazmat protection because they didn't know what was on the train. This legislation fixes that problem as it should. But you cannot say that this has nothing to do with East Palestine when the very people on the ground are begging for some of these changes, and the firefighters, not just in East Palestine, but all across the state of Ohio and all across the country, are saying that they need this stuff. Now, I've heard from people that the railroads are adopting certain voluntary standards. You heard some of that in Senator Brown's testimony. They allegedly have an app that notifies the firefighters and the first responders what's on the trains. Well, if the app was good enough, then why did it fail in East Palestine? If the app provided proper notification, then why did firefighters in my state 7 weeks ago go fight a chemical fire without knowing what was on it? It's a ridiculous argument. Now, I want to look towards the future here, and I want to offer a suggestion to the rail industry and to anybody else who wants to engage on this legislation. I had a good meeting with Alan Shaw yesterday, and I'm looking forward to Mr. Shaw's testimony. I would love to see a commitment from Mr. Shaw to defend and to support certain components of this bill. I think it would be good. I think it'd be good for the people of East Palestine, and I frankly think it would be good for Norfolk Southern as well. But one of the things that we talked about is the hot box detectors and whether we need them every 10 miles or every 15 miles or every 7.5 miles and whether they should be enhanced by additional technology. That's the type of conversation I am willing to have, and I don't want to speak for Senator Brown, but I guess that he'd probably be willing to have it too. Let's have that conversation about what the proper pacing is for the hot box detectors. Let's have the conversation about how we can advance this stuff with better technology. I am open to that. But to the rail industry, don't lie about my bill. Don't slander the staff who drafted it. If you would like to have a good faith conversation about rail safety, let's do exactly that. But we're going to learn a lot during this committee and in the weeks to come if the rail industry would like to do that. I hope they will, because I'm certainly ready to join that conversation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Vance, for your passionate support on this issue. I know it'll make a difference, and I appreciate you pushing back on some of the misinformation that is out there. We're now going to go to Governor DeWine, who is joining us remotely. Governor DeWine, always good to see you. Not good to see you in these circumstances, but we appreciate your leadership in helping to articulate a path forward. And I'd be remiss if I didn't also thank you for your leadership on the CHIPS and Science Act and helping us get that legislation done. So we look forward to you getting your help and support on moving the Brown-Vance legislation as well. So our colleague, but now Governor DeWine.
Chairwoman Cantwell, thank you very much. Ranking Member Cruz, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I'm actually, as you can see, remote, and I'm in the East Palestine High School Library. Let me just tell you a little bit about this community. The new year started off normally in East Palestine. It's a village of about 4,700 people. They just enjoyed Christmas, the annual Snowflake Festival in December. The third quarter of school started in late January. Parts have been cast for the high school musical, The Lion King Jr., that frankly my wife and I had the opportunity to watch a few days ago. And the athletic director was preparing to host 25 to 30 teams for the Bulldog Invitational track meet in April. The evening of February 3rd, 2023 started off really not unlike a lot of Friday nights in that time of year in East Palestine. Parents and members of the community were gathered at the high school cheering on the varsity boys basketball team at the Bulldogs home game against United High School Eagles from nearby Hanoverton. Girls varsity team had played against the Eagles just the night before. The backdrop, of course, to all things in East Palestine is the near constant rumble of trains running through the village. But the people of East Palestine are certainly used to that, and many don't even notice them anymore. That was until 8:55 that Friday night. At 8:55, life stopped being normal for everyone in this community. It stopped feeling safe when 38 cars of the Norfolk Southern freight train, carrying hundreds of thousands of pounds of hazardous material, hurtled off the track. Since then, I've visited the community a number of times and have had mothers tell me that they're afraid to let their children go outside in the grass to play. Some residents have told me about their bloody noses, their rashes, their coughs that they have developed, while others who don't have symptoms now ask, what's going to happen to me in 10 or 15 years? What's going to happen to my children? Some want to know if it's safe to plant a garden this spring. And if they do, will the vegetables be safe to eat? People wonder about their property values of their homes. And if they want to sell, will they ever be able to sell their homes? Businesses worry about, are they going to be able to stay afloat? Many people just wonder, will life ever return to normal? What is clear for all of East Palestine is this, that this has been a deeply traumatic experience for this wonderful community. While all the tests of the air and the soil and the water have thus far shown repeatedly that things are safe, fear remains. The people of East Palestine have told me that they want their community back. They want things to go back to the way they were before the train wreck. Members of the committee, Norfolk Southern has an obligation to restore this community. It was their train, their tracks, their accident. They're responsible for this tragedy. I want to thank Senator Vance, Senator Brown, the other co-sponsors of their bill, the Rail Safety Act of 2023. I want to also thank Congressman Johnson, Congresswoman Sykes for their bill, the Rail Act. I'm grateful. The drafters, both bills included my request for a provision requiring that the rail carriers in the future be required to provide advance notification to state and local emergency responders about what these trains are in fact carrying. Let me go further. I urge the Senate and House to swiftly act to improve the safety of our railroads. Norfolk Southern must do everything in its power to put everything back as it was in East Palestine before 8:55 Friday, February 3rd. The people of this village have a right. They have a right to get their lives back. They have a right to get their community back and simply to get their peace of mind. Let me just add, if I could, one additional thing. Shortly after the derailment, I heard repeatedly from residents that they were concerned about their health. So we worked with the East Palestine community, with the health department and others, to create a clinic for the residents so they could be assessed immediately, so they could walk in and be cared for. We started that clinic shortly after this tragedy occurred. This morning in this library, I met with medical leaders from the East Liverpool City Hospital, and we are announcing today that we'll be making this clinic into a permanent clinic for the community. It's going to be a full-service clinic that will provide comprehensive care and treatment. Anybody can walk in, anyone can be treated. And this is a long-term commitment to the health of the people of East Palestine. They're worried about their future. They're worried about where things are going to be in 5 or 10 or 15 years. It's important that they be able to continue to get assessed. It's particularly important. I talked to the fire chief the other day, very, very concerned about the 300 responders, not just from East Palestine, but from all the areas into Pennsylvania who responded that night. They all need to be assessed. There needs to be established a baseline, and they need to be assured that in 5 years or 10 years, there's still a place where they can go. We look to the railroad. We look to the railroad to establish that fund. I've talked to the CEO who's testifying in just a moment. We believe that fund needs to be established. It needs to be large enough to give people the confidence they have that they're going to be protected in the future. Thank you so much for inviting me to testify, and I'm very, very grateful.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you so much for highlighting those two details about the clinic and about the need that the community has to be further protected with resources. We'll now turn to Ms. Allen. Thank you so much for being here. I'm sorry to hear about your personal loss, and we very much appreciate you being willing to testify today. Ms. Allison.
Thank you for inviting me to testify. I'm honored to be here, but I wish it was under better circumstances. I'm here to put a face on this disaster. This isn't just a political issue, it is a people issue. Everyone who lives in East Palestine is aware of the trains that pass by, but we've never really thought about them. Now, we can't think about anything else. We will never forget the night the train derailed. I could see a huge fireball from my driveway. It didn't seem real. Little did we know, this was only the beginning. My family chose to evacuate, but many did not. None of us knew exactly what dangers were on that train. We now know that train carried multiple toxic petrochemicals. When authorities conducted a controlled burn, it was like a bomb went off, a bomb containing vinyl chloride, which releases dangerous chemicals. When burned, these chemicals never go away. Chemicals such as dioxins, which are not safe at any level and cause damage that may not show up for years. 2 days later, our government told us it was safe to come home. But is it safe? People and animals in my community are sick. The EPA tells us the data is fine, while independent researchers say that there are high levels of carcinogens all around us. Who do we trust? And then there's our mental health. The anxiety is real. My 7-year-old has asked me if he is going to die from living in his own home. What do I tell him? This preventable accident has put a scarlet letter on our town. People don't want to come here. Businesses are struggling. Our home values are plummeting. Even if we wanted to leave, we couldn't. Who would buy our homes? There were over 1,000 train derailments last year, and the expansion of the petrochemical industry means that more trains carrying toxic chemicals will put more families at risk. Alan Shaw has repeatedly said that Norfolk Southern will make it right, but who determines what is right here? East Palestine residents expect meaningful relief, including short and long-term healthcare monitoring, home value protection, and an actionable economic development plan, including the Norfolk Southern training facility placed in our town. As though the train derailment wasn't enough, less than 2 weeks ago, my mother lost her 3-year battle with cancer. My mother taught me to fight for what's right, and I will always fight to protect the health and safety of my children, of your children, and of every child in America. Remember, this is about people. This is about a community that no one had ever heard of before becoming ground zero in a small town being destroyed overnight. We must have strong businesses, but I urge all of you to support common sense safety regulations so this doesn't happen again. Together, we can make sure that East Palestine and the surrounding areas not only recover, but thrive, and that no other community experiences this tragedy. My mom always told me, either you find a way or you find an excuse. So it's time to learn from this and move forward together. Let's find a way, not another excuse. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Allison. And unfortunately, in these safety accidents, we have often found that it is the voice of the families who come forward and help keep the focus on to safety and security. So thank you for helping to lead this charge on this particular issue. We very much appreciate it. I don't know if anybody has any questions for these panelists here. If not, we will turn to the second panel. But maybe, Ms. Allison, I just wanted to emphasize, maybe for you or the governor, or any of our colleagues, this issue of making sure that there is proper equipment in the community. Everybody is in agreement that we have to come up with something that gives proper equipment to the community in advance. Is that right? Governor DeWine, is that where you are?
Well, absolutely. I think Madam Chair, the other thing that I've talked with the CEO quite extensively about is training. In Ohio, most of our fire departments, particularly in our rural areas, are volunteers. And so the railroad really has unique information, and it's important that they share that information about how you deal with these train fires, how you deal with the train wrecks. As you pointed out, that particular night, they didn't know what they were fighting. They didn't know what they were dealing with, at least not for sure. So training is very, very important. And I think, we're making some progress in that regard. And I would, like for all the railroads to really participate in that training.
Madam Chair, could I?
Madam Chair?
Yes. Senator Brown, then Senator Vance.
Thank you. We are working to create a fund, sort of a regional fund, both for training, as Governor DeWine said, and for equipment. So East Palestine has one paid firefighter, the chief, and about 20 volunteers, 22, I think. And they obviously are not going to be able to train them all to combat hazmat fires. But we look at it a regional way all over the state and all over the country with funding from the chemical companies and the railroads, so that they can all descend on a place like East Palestine from 15, 20 minutes away with the right equipment and the right training.
Senator Vance.
Yeah, I forgot my manners earlier, Madam Chair, so I appreciate, I just wondered why we still had Governor DeWine, thank him for being here and thank him for his leadership and his hard work over the last 6-7 weeks, because he's done a great job. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, the reason I bring this issue up is because we've had the same issue in the Pacific Northwest as it relates to oil train derailments. And unfortunately, they happen in communities where you might be dealing with a volunteer fire department. And what resources are there going to be in that community? So I think the committee here has to really think about how we're going to, what we can do to help communities be prepared in these instances. Senator?
Madam Chair?
Yeah.
Madam Chair?
I just
After you.
Senator Klobuchar.
Yeah, Senator, I just wanted to thank Senator Brown and Vance and the governor, as well as Ms. Allison, for this incredibly constructive testimony. I can't even imagine what you've been through, Ms. Allison, and the fact that you're able to come forward and testify in such a meaningful way. We really appreciate it. And the bill, I'm on the bill. I'm a strong supporter of it. I just thank you for working across the aisle, because you could actually get things done that way. So thank you.
Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank each of the witnesses for your testimony. It's been powerful. Ms. Allison, in particular, I want to thank you for your courage coming and speaking up. I'm sorry about the loss of your mom. That's very difficult, and you're sharing the story of your young children and what they're going through is really powerful and moving. And so thank you for giving voice to their fears, their concerns. Thank you also for giving voice. There are other moms from East Palestine who are here with you and standing with you, and thank you for speaking for them as well. I wanted to ask you, we're still relatively early in the aftermath of the derailment, but at least to date, are you satisfied with the response you've seen, number one, from the federal government, and number two, from Norfolk Southern? Do you feel that the families who've been impacted by this have received what you need, have received the compensation you deserve? And if you're not satisfied, what more do you think is needed?
I would say there's always room for improvement, and this is something that, at least in our community, we never expected it to happen here. I would say that there has been some response, but specifically in regards to Norfolk Southern, I do think there are a lot of opportunities for improvements, at least from a lot of the community members. And, I just shared my experience, but I do have testimonies from about 50 other residents with me today that I can share with you. I was reading those last night in my hotel room and just tears streaming down my face. It's absolutely heartbreaking. I'm a market researcher by trade. And so looking at all of this data in the aggregate, what I saw time and time again was people were saying essentially they feel like Norfolk Southern is just offering breadcrumbs throughout the community with funding. So right now, for people that don't feel safe at home, we did receive a flyer that said that you could leave the community for the time being if you wanted to reevacuate, and some people have chosen to do that. However, there's not clear guidelines of what is going to be paid for and what's not. And so when people go to the assistance center, some people are having a good experience, and then some people are really being questioned about why do you feel like you should leave? Why do you feel like you need this money from us? And really feeling interrogated. And so that's really concerning because I think a lot more data needs to come out. This testing that the EPA finally said that they're testing for dioxins, et cetera. That's really good, but there's so much data that needs to come out there. And again, a couple of things. One, you can make the data look however you want. And also, two, you can test or not test for whatever you want. So I think from a community perspective, we just want to make sure that everything is being tested that should be tested. And we're not really sure if that's being done or not. So I would say we're just really, everybody loves living in East Palestine, and we would like to stay there, but only if it's safe. And so there's a lot of confusion in the community about whether long-term, if it's a good choice to stay or not.
Well, I'm certain you mentioned the 50 statements you had, I'm certain that the chair would love to have you submit those statements for the record for the committee, and I'm sure members on both sides of the aisle would like to see those statements. One of the things you testified about is the concerns about the drop in home values. Mm-hmm. And I can understand that being a very real concern. You mentioned you've done work as a market researcher. Are there any data that are actually quantifying what the loss in home values has been? And if so, at this point, are the residents being offered any compensation? Is Norfolk Southern offering to make residents whole for the loss in home values? If a family decides that they want to move, are families able to sell their homes? Are there any buyers? Or, one of the things you said powerfully is even if we want to leave, we can't leave. Is there any relief being offered now to say, if you make the decision to move your home and to move your family somewhere else, there is an avenue for you to sell your home and get a fair market price for it?
The short answer is, as of today, no. There is not clear-cut explanation or parameters of how you would do that. We've heard time and time again from Norfolk Southern that they're going to make it right and that they're looking into some long-term health care monitoring and assistance and home value protection, but details of that plan have not been disclosed to residents as of today.
I would encourage for you to let this committee know as it goes forward if there are residents who are looking to move and can't sell their homes. This committee is very interested in making sure that the community of East Palestine is treated fairly and that what you're going through, you receive what is just. And so I would invite you to provide this committee with the specifics so that we can expedite and facilitate making it right.
Thank you.
We are going to get to the second panel, but Senator Welch, did you have a question?
Just briefly, this is really very moving. Listening to Ms. Allison, small communities have something that's really very, very special. It's trust. You trust one another. And there's been a breach of trust here. One of the biggest beneficiaries of the trust in a community like yours, and we have many like yours in Vermont, one of the biggest beneficiaries is Norfolk Southern. They can roll their 2 to 3 mile trains through there without anybody asking a question because you trust them to do the right thing. and they didn't do the right thing. And they had the opportunity to do the right thing, but they made other priorities, stock buybacks in the billions, shortening crews, doing the things that a mom would never do to take a shortcut to provide that security, like to your 7-year-old. And the heart of the discussion here is whether, as a result of the breach of trust by a very large and very powerful, very wealthy corporation, your government, it is your government, should step in to restore justice to you and your fellow citizens. And that's what this hearing is about. Will government step up to provide physical, emotional, and health security as a result of this, just like it would if there was a military threat to our country, where government has got to be on the side of folks like you and your neighbors. So I'm very grateful to you, feel very badly at that breach of trust, because, you know, that trust gets you through hard times. You don't even complain because you know your neighbor's got your back. Well, you have to know the government's got your back. We admire you. This is going to go on for some time, as Governor DeWine said. But I think all of us in this legislation are going to do our level best to respond to you and your neighbors and what you're going through. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Welch. And again, thank you to our colleagues, to Governor DeWine, to Ms. Allison. Thank you for a very compelling testimony. We'll now move to the second panel. We are going to hear from Jennifer Hamady, the chair of the National Transportation Safety Board. We will hear from David Comstock, Fire Chief of Ohio's Western Reserve Joint Fire District, whose department responded to East Palestine's derailment. We'll hear from Mr. Clyde Whitaker, the Legislative Director of Ohio State SMART TD, who is a longtime railroader, Mr. Alan Shaw, CEO of Norfolk Southern, and lastly, we will hear from Ian Jeffries, CEO of the Association of American Railroads, who represents the railroad sector. If all of those witnesses would come forward, and we will start in a minute with Ms. Hamady from the NTSB. Welcome to all the witnesses. We appreciate you being here. Look forward to hearing your testimony. We'll start with you, Ms. Hamady. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate all the work that the NTSB does. I expressed to you earlier in private your leadership in the investigation of the seaplane accident in the Pacific Northwest, and we continue to look forward to your comments on aviation in general. We appreciated your comments prior to the Aviation Summit last week about the fact that the FAA needs to implement its open action items that will help us on near miss incidents at airports. So thank you for your continued voice. I think when we envisioned the safety legislation that we passed, we wanted to know trends, and we wanted FAA to respond faster to trends. So thank you for helping to identify these trends in aviation and some of the issues. So with that, we'll turn to you, Ms. Hamady, for this hearing on rail safety.
Thank you so much, and good morning. I'd like to begin with addressing the people who were impacted by the derailment in East Palestine. On behalf of the NTSB, we are so sorry for all that you're going through. Please know that the agency is committed to conducting a thorough, independent, and transparent investigation of this derailment. We'll issue safety recommendations to prevent similar tragedies from reoccurring, including urgent safety recommendations, which we can do at any point if our investigation warrants it. In the next few months, we'll hold an investigative hearing in East Palestine where we'll include time for community members to provide comments and ask us questions about our investigation. My written testimony
What do
goes
we
into
wear
more
for that?
detail on the derailment, and by now the preliminary facts have been well covered. The bottom line is this: there are no accidents. This derailment, as all accidents we investigate, was 100% preventable. As is the case with all our investigations, we're looking into every factor that could have led to this tragedy. We're looking into the wheel bearing, the wheel sets, the axle, and the rail car, including their manufacture, maintenance, and inspection, the hot bearing detectors, Norfolk Southern's temperature thresholds for alerting train crews of safety concerns, and their use of real-time monitoring and data trending, and the company's policies, practices, and overall safety culture. We're also looking into the design, maintenance, and performance of the tank cars used to transport hazmat, including the pressure relief devices on the 5 vinyl chloride tank cars, emergency response preparedness and communications, the decision-making process that led to the vent and burn, the U.S. Department of Transportation's oversight of rail and hazmat safety, and so much more. I know that there are a lot of questions about our investigation, and I will provide what I can today. I also know that Congress is eager to improve rail safety more broadly, so I offer the following 5 issues for your consideration. First, the definition expanded to a broader array of hazmat. And the definition's threshold of 20 loaded tank cars in a continuous block or 35 tank cars dispersed throughout a train should be eliminated. Second, DOT 111 should be phased out of all hazmat service. They're not as protected as DOT 117 tank cars. Third, people deserve to know what chemicals are moving through their communities and how to stay safe in an emergency. That includes responders who risk their lives for each of us every single day. They deserve to be prepared. That means access to real-time information, obtaining the right training and gear, and having the right communications and planning tools. Fourth, like cockpit voice recorders in aviation, audio and video recorders in the locomotive cab are essential for helping investigators determine the cause of an accident and make more precise safety recommendations. Recorders also help operators proactively improve their safety policies and practices. In the East Palestine derailment, the locomotive was equipped with an inward-facing camera. However, since the locomotive was put immediately back into service following the accident, the data was overwritten. That means the recorder only provided about 15 minutes of data before the derailment and 5 minutes after.
Well, that's pretty
The FAST
convenient.
Act, following terrible tragedies in Chatsworth and in Philadelphia, required Amtrak and commuter railroads to maintain crash and fire-hardened inward and outward-facing image recorders in all controlling locomotives that have a minimum of a 12-hour continuous recording capability. This was extremely helpful in our DuPont, Washington investigation. Now is the time to expand that requirement to audio and include the Class I freight railroads in that mandate. In fact, now is the time to address all of the NTSB's open rail safety recommendations, many of which are on our most wanted list. Fifth and finally, as the committee works on enhancing rail safety, I trust that you'll consider the resources that we desperately need to carry out our critical safety mission. Investments in the NTSB are investments in safety across all modes of transportation. To that end, we look forward to working with the committee on this year's reauthorization of NTSB and hope that you will approve the President's budget request for the NTSB of $145 million. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hamady. Thank you so much. Mr. Comstock, welcome.
She wants more
Thank
money.
you for being
What
here.
the hell?
Good morning, Chair Cantwell, Ranking Member Cruz, distinguished members of the committee. My name is David Comstock, and I'm the Fire Chief of the Western Reserve Joint Fire District located in Poland, Ohio. I'm also a member of a National Volunteer Fire Council, a nonprofit membership organization that serves as a national voice of over 670,000 volunteer firefighters, comprising 65% of the nation's fire service. My department was one of over 50 fire departments that responded to the East Palestine derailment. This incident has emphasized the need to better train and equip firefighters to respond to hazardous material incidents, specifically to derailments in rural areas, which are mostly served by volunteer fire departments that often lack sufficient resources, tax base, and manpower. The National Fire Protection Association defines an operational level of competence for hazmat response as what's needed for a firefighter to implement or support actions to protect the public from the effects of a hazmat release. Alarmingly, the NFPA's needs assessment of the U.S. Fire Service showed that only 55% of firefighters are certified at a hazmat operational level of competence. For many firefighters, hazmat training is difficult to access, especially for volunteers who may need to take time off from their paying jobs. Progress has been made in making hazardous material training more available to firefighters through the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration's hazardous material grants. Specifically, firefighters are trained through hazardous materials emergency preparedness, assistance for local emergency response training, hazardous material instructor training, community safety, and supplemental public safety training grant programs. Through a SPST grant, the NVFC is offering 15 in-person hazmat train-to-trainer opportunities across the U.S. at no cost to departments. It is important that the NVFC can provide this program at no cost to volunteer departments which often lack a tax base to support training. Thanks to the PHMSA grants I mentioned earlier, the NVFC and other first responder organizations have been able to train tens of thousands of firefighters. The NVFC asks that Congress pass legislation to increase funding to these PHMSA hazardous material training grants. The NVFC is pleased to see that S576, Railway Safety Act of 2023, includes language that increases support to the alert and supplemental training grant programs. The Federal Emergency Management Agency's assistance to firefighter grants and staffing for adequate fire and emergency response grants is also critical to fire departments. The goal of these grants is to bring all fire departments up to a baseline level of readiness. Many departments struggle to achieve this baseline. An alarming example is NFPA data showing that 53% of fire departments cannot equip every firefighter with self-contained breathing apparatus. The NVFC requests that Congress increase funding to AFG and SAFER grant programs and pass S870, Grants and Safety Act, as soon as possible to ensure the authorization for these critical grants doesn't lapse at the end of this fiscal year. The NVFC also asked Congress to provide additional support to local and regional response coordination initiatives. These include hazardous material regional response teams, which facilitate regional public safety communications and coordination on hazmat response, and local emergency planning committees to ensure they fulfill their mission of fostering dialogue amongst hazmat stakeholders within a community to prevent and prepare for releases of hazardous chemicals. The NVFC further encourages Congress to provide additional support to FEMA's local delivery of additional National Incident Management System training courses, which provide a comprehensive national approach to incident management. The NVFC also requests that we, the NFPA, Congress, the National Transportation Safety Board, and the Federal Rail Administration work together to enhance the methods for emergency hazmat product identification. Firefighters face a higher risk of developing cancer compared to the general public. The NVFC supports several initiatives to combat firefighting-related cancer exposure. Most notably, the NVFC and the International Association of Fire Chiefs Volunteer and Combination Officer section produced a Lavender written report, a best practice guide to reduce toxic exposure and risks to prevent firefighter cancer. On behalf of the nation's volunteer firefighters, I thank you for the opportunity to address the committee regarding the hazardous material response needs of the volunteer first responders. The NVFC looks forward to continuing to work with the committee and the stakeholders assembled here today to improve the emergency response to hazmat incidents and ensure that firefighters are properly trained and equipped to carry out this response. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here, and we're so sorry that you had to deal with this, but your experience is very helpful in us helping to know how to evaluate this moving forward and the resources that you're asking for. Mr. Whitaker, welcome. We look forward to your testimony.
Good morning, Chairwoman Cantwell and Ranking Member Cruz and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. My name is Clyde Whitaker. I'm the Ohio State Legislative Board Director for Smart Transportation. which represents approximately 3,000 railroad workers in the crafts of conductor, locomotive engineer, yard master, and train person. One of my primary roles is to protect, improve, and ensure the safety of our members. I would like to begin by saying that our hearts of rail labor break for citizens of East Palestine. This derailment did not have to happen, and it makes it so much more frustrating for us to know that it was very predictable. And yet our warnings and cries for help over the last 7 years have fallen on deaf ears, and the outcome was exactly as we feared. Now the result is a town that doesn't feel safe in their own homes, businesses failing to survive, and railroad that prioritized its own movement of trains before the people in the community, as well as its workers. It truly is a shame that the operational changes in place prior to that incident are still in place today, and the possibility for a similar disaster is just as possible. My entire railroad career, I've listened to the railroads portray a message and image of safety first, but I have never witnessed or experienced that truth one single day on the property. For years, I've handled complaints after complaint regarding unsafe practices and unsafe environments, and for almost every single one, I've been fought every step of the way. The truth is, ask any railroad worker, and they will tell you that their carriers are masters of checking the boxes, of saying the right things without ever doing anything meaningful toward improving safety. Their only focus is on the operating ratios and bottom lines, which is evidenced by the fact that their bonus structures are set up to reward timely movements of freight rather than reaching destinations safely as they once were. Actions do speak louder than words, and I assure you that what you have heard and will hear from the railroads today are nothing more than words. Their actions are what's experienced by men and women I represent, as well as what the people of East Palestine have been through. This is the reality of what happens when railroads are primarily left to govern and regulate themselves. To that point, on July 11, 2022, I filed a complaint with the FRA regarding an unsafe practice that was occurring on Norfolk Southern. Despite existing operating rules to the contrary, NS was giving instructions to crews to disregard wayside detector failures and to keep their trains moving. This meant that trains were not being inspected as intended and that the crews were not able to ascertain the integrity of such trains. This practice remained in place even after East Palestine, but these types of issues aren't just relegated to wayside detectors. It is a virus that has plagued the industry for some time with the inception of precision scheduled railroading. Across America, inspections and maintenance is being deferred to expedite the movement of trains. No longer is identifying defects and unsafe conditions the goal of inspections, but rather minimize the time it takes to perform them or the elimination of them altogether. Compound this with the fact that the railroads on a determined course to grow these trains to astronomical lengths, and you have a predictable outcome, and that outcome is the event like we've seen at East Palestine. We need meaningful change, and we desperately need people like yourselves to reverse this dangerous trends in the railroad industry. The Rail Safety Act of 2023 goes a long way toward doing just that. As we sit here today, the railroads are attempting to eliminate the conductor from the cab of a locomotive. They want you to believe that technology is capable of replacing the role of conductor. But what they won't tell you is technology was present in the cab of the locomotive, and when the train finally came to a stop this day, its job was done. But unlike the technology, the engineer and the conductor and his trainee sprang into action. They identified the derailment in the presence of fire. They contacted EMS. They applied brakes on the train cars to prevent further catastrophic damage. They separated the locomotives and got the entire crew to safety, all of which technology sat dormant. We cannot afford to be dormant. The degradation of safety is very real, and the numbers prove it. The frequency of derailments is up, the frequency of injuries is up, and from a railroader's perspective, the potential for another disaster is as high as it's ever been. We cannot allow the railroads to continue to dodge and sharpshoot regulations. We cannot allow them to be sole owners and creators of the data and safety statistics. and we cannot allow them to prioritize revenue over profit. Oversight is desperately needed before the next big one happens. I thank you for allowing me to testify here today, and I look forward to any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Whitaker. Very much appreciate you being here and your statement. We'll now hear from Mr. Shaw. Welcome, Mr. Shaw.
Come on, Mr. Shaw, what do you got to say?
Good morning,
I'm
Chairwoman
sorry.
Cantwell, Ranking Member Cruz, and distinguished members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to testify before you today. My name is Alan Shaw, and I've been President and CEO of Norfolk Southern since May 2022. I want to open by stating how deeply sorry I am
Told
for the
you.
impact this derailment has had on the citizens of East Palestine and the surrounding communities. I've been to East Palestine and the surrounding communities many times over the past 6 weeks. I've spoken with the community leaders, business owners, school officials, clergy, families, and others. They've shared their stories and their concerns about the health of their families, their businesses, and the future of the community they love. I am determined to make this right. Norfolk Southern continues to make good on its promise to clean the site safely, thoroughly, and with urgency. You have my personal commitment that we will get the job done and we will help these communities thrive. At the direction of and in collaboration with the U.S. EPA and state and local agencies, we are developing and implementing near and longer-term cleanup activities. Air and water monitoring have been in place continuously since the accident, and to date, it is consistently indicated that air is safe to breathe and the water is safe to drink. We have already invested more than $24 million in East Palestine and the surrounding communities. Norfolk Southern opened the Family Assistance Center the day after the incident, and through it, we have provided more than $10 million to more than 6,000 families. We have invested over $3 million in community relief funds to support the immediate needs of Ohioans and Pennsylvanians in the area. We have also dedicated over $9 million in funds to reimburse and support emergency responders and health and environmental agencies for costs related to the derailment. As I have said before, this is just a start. We know that people are concerned about long-term health impacts from the derailment. When I appeared before the Senate Committee on Environment and Public Works earlier this month, some members of that committee asked me to be more specific about our commitment to do the right thing. Today, I'm able to share more about our plans. We are in the planning stages of developing a long-term medical compensation fund, a property value assurance program, and a longer-term water testing program. We look forward to working toward a final resolution with relevant stakeholders on the details of these plans. If residents have a concern, we want them to come talk to us. Our website, nsmakingitright.com, provides the latest information and details on how to reach us. I thank Chair Homendy for her leadership in the NTSB's investigation into the derailment, and I pledge to continue to cooperate fully. The NTSB's preliminary report found that the Norfolk Southern crew was operating the train below the speed limit and in an approved manner. Yet, it is clear from this incident that we can always improve. So as the NTSB continues its work, we are not waiting to act to make the railroads safer. Shortly after the derailment, I instructed my team to look at steps we could take to improve safety, beginning immediately. And we have announced a number of initiatives to do just that. These steps are a start, and we look forward to working with policymakers and others in the industry on this. We support legislative efforts that use science and data to enhance the safety of the freight rail industry. And the Railway Safety Act and the Rail Act both include measures with the potential for meaningful improvement, such as funding additional training, better advance notifications, accelerating the phase out of older tank cars, and much more. We strive to make our safety culture the best in the industry. When I began my tenure as CEO 10 months ago, I spent hours in crew rooms all over our 22-state network, thanking our frontline railroaders and asking for their advice. They are proud of the important work they do for this country, and we take their safety and the safety of the communities we serve seriously. Today, I am proud to represent more than 19,700 Norfolk Southern employees who work every day to offer a safe and effective means of transporting goods to businesses and families across our great country. We will continue to invest in the future of Ohio and Pennsylvania and all the states in which we operate, just as we have always done. Norfolk Southern is here for the long haul, and we won't be finished until we make this right. Thank you again for the opportunity to appear before you today. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw. We'll now turn to Mr. Jeffries, and welcome, Mr. Jeffries.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Let me start by extending my sympathy to the residents of East Palestine and surrounding areas. February's derailment is a stark reminder that, as rare as one is, a significant rail incident's impact on the affected community can be extraordinary. And while nothing I say here today can undo the impacts of any rail incident, it is important that we have a clear-eyed discussion about the state of rail safety and steps that have been taken or could be taken. As we know, Norfolk Southern is continuing cleanup efforts in East Palestine while the NTSB's meticulous investigation is ongoing. While those parties will continue to address matters related to that incident, today I will provide a broader perspective. Let me be clear. Railroads work every day to improve safety toward an ultimate goal of zero incidents and zero injuries. This starts with our employees, whose commitment to moving America's freight 24/7 and doing it safely should be commended. Post-pandemic hiring efforts continue, with our employee base currently the highest it's been in over 3 years. And because a well-maintained railroad is a safe railroad, the over $20 billion in annual investments back into the physical network have resulted in the nation's highest-rated infrastructure by the American Society of Civil Engineers. The result? Rail is by far the safest way to move goods on land, especially hazardous materials. Per carload, the hazmat accident rate is down 78% since 2000, and 2022 saw the lowest rate of hazmat incidents in the entire industry's history. Additionally, FRA data show Class I railroads' mainline accident rate in 2022 was at an all-time low, as was the employee injury rate. But that does little to comfort a community that experiences a significant derailment. And that's why we must continue to apply lessons learned and take steps to drive the industry's accident rate even lower. Every train trip provides learning tools for the future. To that end, railroads consistently invest in technologies and take action without waiting for government requirements. Consider two recent actions. First, following an industry-wide analysis, railroads are installing approximately 1,000 additional wayside hotbox detectors on the national network, standardizing critical alert thresholds for these systems, and analyzing and adopting new industry standards for trending analysis protocols to preempt potential problems. The vast network of these and other wayside detection systems exists today because railroads installed them voluntarily, not because of government intervention. And just 2 weeks ago, upon learning that a segment of new cars on the network could be prone to derailment-causing loose wheel sets, the industry took immediate action to take them out of service until those wheel sets are replaced. Myriad tools and methods are used every day to prevent incidents. Positive train control is fully implemented in helping prevent catastrophic accidents. Automated track inspection that sees into the track, as well as machine visioning and onboard sensors, all improve safety. Yet prevention is just one part of the three-legged safety stool, along with mitigation and response. On the former, the industry has a well-documented history of petitioning for stronger tank car standards. We are also committed to working with our partners and Congress to get older tank cars off the network. On response, first let me recognize Mr. Comstock here today and every first responder who tended to the accident in East Palestine. These individuals, like all firefighters who respond to rail incident, should be commended for their service. To do their jobs, though, they need proper training and tools, and thus the industry is reinforcing its training programs and expanding access to information. This year, railroads will train 20,000 first responders in communities across the country, while the industry can provide another 2,000 first responders with free, in-depth training at our world-class facility in Colorado. This week, we launched a pilot program directly targeting emergency communication centers to promote broader access to AskRail, which provides first responders real-time information about the contents of every car in a train and the safe handling of those contents in the event of an accident. Congress can support this effort by helping increase awareness of AskRail in your communities, and we ask for your help in getting the word out. In closing, railroads are fully committed to safety advancement through our own actions and working collaboratively. We support data-driven policies with demonstrable safety benefits, including the goals of legislative provisions before this committee, and look forward to working together. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. I'm going to defer my first round of questioning to let Senator Klobuchar, who's been here the whole morning, and we thank her for her interest in all of this. Senator Klobuchar.
Well, thank you very much. I was, like everyone here, horrified by what happened. And actually, when you look at the numbers, trains derailed 1,164 times last year, up 17% in the last decade. 29 of those derailments were actually in my state. And in 2022, 817 people across the country were killed in rail accidents, 266 in railroad crossing collisions. So clearly, there is reason to go forward immediately with Senator Brown and Senator Vance's legislation and to help in Ohio. I guess I would start with you, Mr. Shaw. Norfolk Southern's accident rate jumped 76% between 2013 and 2022. And could you just briefly explain why and if you support the legislation that our colleagues have proposed?
Yes, Senator, thank you for that question. We are a safe railroad. The number of derailments on Norfolk Southern last year was the lowest in the last 2 decades. We are committed to getting better. And so, yes, there are many provisions within the Vance-Brown bill for which we give our full-throated endorsement.
And then do you support the bill?
I support a number of provisions within the bill, Senator, which include the
And which ones don't you support?
Senator, we support the acceleration of the phase-in of the DT-117s, funding first responder, hazmat training, expanding advanced notification.
Okay, I'll just put it in writing. I was just trying to figure out which ones you didn't support and why, because I just think it's very important to move ahead. They've signaled an interest in working with all stakeholders to try to get this done. And I just don't want this to be one of these moments where we wait 2 years to pass a bill. Chief Comstock, thank you for your work. We are greatly appreciative of the first responders, firefighters, and everything that you did, not only in this incident, but across the country. So Senator Kramer and I today are introducing a bill, the Honoring Our Fallen Heroes Act, to start looking at making sure that our firefighters, we already have a register going on, as you know, that a bunch of us worked on, but to making sure that this is included in their benefits.
Thank you.
The exposure and the certain cancers. And we think we're going to get a lot of support for this bill. Actually, it's specifically targeted, written in a way that we think is going to be good. So could you talk about what some key information you wish you had before arriving at the scene of the derailment?
I think in any instance that when responders are proceeding to a scene of an emergency, we want to have as much information as we can. And whether it's a car accident, whether it's a medical emergency, house fire, or a hazardous materials incident. So the more information and the quicker we can get information, the better. There are apps out there that have been discussed, AskRail being one, that provide that type of information. But I think we could go further by looking at newer technology that will put that information that's available in AskRail on my phone while I'm en route to the emergency. That's one instance.
Right.
But understand that there's a lot of other issues that need to be looked at.
And also to be alerted of what toxic chemicals are in there, so you know what you need.
Everything.
Okay.
I mean, the more the better, but I think that the fire service needs a seat at that table with the railroads and developing the technology that's going to help us out.
Okay, thank you. Railway safety, another part of this, of course. Mr. Jeffries, with railway workers being exposed to a range of serious risks, what is the industry doing to improve worker safety?
Well, there are a myriad of regulatory requirements around worker safety under the under the Federal Railroad Administration. Certainly, we comply with all of those. I know Alan and my other CEOs have made a very concerted effort to get out in the field, and a lot of that's hearing firsthand what's working, what's not from the employees in the field, because they're the ones who are seeing what's going on every day. So that firsthand information that feeds up through management and through the executives can really drive decision making. The important thing is that we do take a holistic approach to safety, and the evidence we've seen, as I mentioned, 2022 had the lowest employee injury rate in our industry's history, but that's not zero. So we've got to continue to look for opportunities to further provide safe working conditions.
Right. Do you want to add anything to that, Ms. Hamandi?
We do have rail worker safety on our most wanted list of transportation safety improvements, and one of actually we have several recommendations that do not support the use by the railroads of train approach warning. What that is when roadway workers are working on the track, they put a watchman out, and a train, as a train comes along, the watchman is supposed to flag it for those who are working on the track, and they get off the track. We've seen several instances where that hasn't happened, and they've died, unfortunately. And there are other options. For example, using positive train control after establishing a established work zone. So we have recommendations on that.
All right, and I'm going to follow up in writing. My colleagues, I know, I'll have questions on the hazmat training, Mr. Comstock, because I understand it's difficult sometimes for firefighters to attend this kind of training and what we can do, and have many other questions. So thank you very much, all of you.
Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to each of the witnesses who are here today. Chief Comstock, please, thank you for your service, and please express my gratitude to the men and women who were first responders, who were there when this horrific tragedy occurred, and thank you for their courage and the difference that each of them makes in the community. Chair Homendy, let me thank you also for the professional way in which the NTSB has approached this accident. I think you have been a truth teller. I think you have managed to avoid politics and focus on the substance of what caused this accident and how we can prevent it. And so it's not that often that we get to thank a public official for doing a good and effective job. I think you provided also some helpful suggestions in your testimony that I'm certain the committee will look closely at the specific suggestions you put forward. As I look at what caused this derailment, there are a number of factors, but one factor that from the early reports stands out is the hot box detectors. We now know that the train derailed past 3 hot box detectors prior to the derailment. 30 miles away, the reading was 38 degrees above ambient temperature. Then 20 miles away, it had risen to 103 degrees above ambient temperature, so it had risen dramatically. And then just prior to the derailment, it was 253 degrees above ambient temperature, reflecting that the bearing had locked and derailment was imminent. Mr. Shaw, why did this trend in temperature not trigger an alert earlier to stop the train? And in particular, why were you not able to stop the train after the second reading had gone from 38 degrees above ambient temperature to 103 degrees above ambient temperature?
Senator, thank you for that question. I'll note that the NTSB report indicated that the crew did nothing wrong and we certainly thank them for that. The hot box detectors were working as designed, and there were no track defects. Since the derailment and the preliminary results of the NTSB report, we led the rail industry, and the rail industry has also implemented implementation of far more hot box detectors across our network. We're adding 200 hot box detectors on our network to reduce the spacing between our hot box detectors. Our hot box detectors are already spaced amongst the lowest in the industry, and I think Mr. Jeffries had indicated that the entire industry was adding about 1,000 hot box detectors.
Mr. Shaw, perhaps you didn't hear my question, so let me ask it again.
Yeah.
The first hot box measured 38 degrees above ambient temperature. As I understand, the ambient temperature was about 20 degrees, so that was roughly 58 degrees. 10 miles later, the second hot box measured 103 degrees above ambient temperature. That's an increase of over 60 degrees in 10 miles. Why did Norfolk Southern not stop the train then and examine the bearing to make sure that it didn't melt the axle and that you didn't have a derailment? If you'd stopped then, it would have prevented the derailment. So my question is, why did the second hot box reading not trigger action?
Senator, my understanding is that that second reading was still below our alarm threshold, which is amongst the lowest in the industry. In response to this, the industry has agreed to work together to share best practices with respect to hot box detectors, trending technology, and thresholds.
So when you and I visited my office yesterday, you said your threshold is now 170 degrees above ambient temperature. As I understand it, at the time of the derailment, your threshold was 200 degrees above ambient temperature. So you're right, 103 was not 200 degrees. As you and I discussed, I've spoken with your competitors, other Class 1 railroads who have indicated that trending technology and algorithms can measure significant changes in temperature, and in particular can flag that when it goes from 38 degrees to 103 degrees, you need to stop and take a look at it. Mr. Jeffries, let me ask you in terms of how other railroads handle it. What is the technology that is available to spot this problem before it's gotten so bad that a derailment is imminent?
Well, thank you for that, and that's a spot-on question, and that's one of the three things we're focused on as an industry. So one is the physical deployment of approximately 1,000 additional detectors. Two is creating the industry standard of 170 degrees as a critical threshold. And the third one is really looking at industry best practices to examine and potentially adopt new algorithms for trending detection so that if there is a dramatic spike in temperature, even though it may be below that absolute threshold, it's caught. And so we've brought the entire industry together, and over the next month, we'll be reporting out, okay, what can we learn from each other, and what are the best practices we can adopt, and what other steps need to be taken based on the information we have and the predictive analytics we can put into place.
And if I could ask one final question,
Yes, and Mr. Whitaker was trying to weigh in there. I don't know if you
Mr. Whitaker, sure. I didn't see that, but sure, I would welcome you.
Thanks for acknowledging Senator Cruz. I'd like to just make note that trending defect detector technology, from being in the cab of a locomotive, when we pass a defect detector, it trends to a office like Norfolk Southern in Atlanta, Georgia. It doesn't convey to the railroad crews, which is a problem in this incident as well as many others that still continue to this day. What we need as a train crew, which they say they listen, they haven't been listening for quite a while. We need to be notified whenever these trending detectors are seeing this car trend hotter. That way we can keep a better eye on it, or even stop, inspect that rail car.
Sure.
But as it stands right now, even after East Palestine, it's all about moving the train. That's all PSR is. That's all they care about. So right now, they tell the train crew to stop your train, set your brakes in a full service application, then release. And hopefully that releases whatever the case may be. When the safest cause case should be, we stop and go back and inspect. That's what the conductor is there for. That's why a two-person crew is essential.
So that's very helpful. So you're saying, if I'm hearing you right, that having real-time reporting of what the sensors are showing for the conductor, the engineer, would be helpful. Mr. Jeffries, are there technological barriers? Are there impediments to giving the crew real-time reporting of what's happening?
So I can't get into the technicalities of that, but I will say one thing we are focused on with any sort of regulatory requirement on wayside detectors themselves is that we do need to be given the opportunity to evolve our technology, because continuous onboard detection is the next phase of sensors and detection. And so certainly that's something we're interested in and interested in further deploying and further developing. Well, as we're drafting this legislation, I would ask you to please, if there are technological issues we should know about, please let us know, because I have to say what Mr. Whitaker said there makes a lot of sense to me. And if there's a reason it's not yet feasible, we need to know about it, because that seems to me a reasonable element for legislation. Mr. Whitaker, yes, my time's gone, but go ahead, Mr. Whitaker.
I apologize. I do think it's very important to shed some light on this. It is feasible. The technology is there. Several days after East Palestine, we almost had a similar incident in Cleveland area on Norfolk Southern. The crew, the defect detector said no defects to the crew. The train dispatcher came on and said, hey, we have a report of a trending defect detector on the train. We need you to stop and inspect it. Immediately after that, the chief dispatcher, which is the person that controls the whole railroad, told them to keep going. If it were not for an eastbound train passing them and instructing them, hey, your train's on fire.
Wow.
Stop your train. And we set that car out. They had to walking speed this car 5 miles. So the technology is there. They're just raising and lowering their thresholds to move freight.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Markey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's clear that for too long, the rail industry has been raking in profits and putting safety on the sidelines. Mr. Whitaker, do you agree that the East Palestine derailment would have been far worse if there hadn't been multiple crew members on board?
I do, sir. Thank you for the question. I think if the railroads had it their way down to one-person crew and they reduced the conductor position to a ground-based, meaning a person at a pickup truck driving to the site, that puts the engineer in danger. It also puts the response time and the assessment of the issue in danger.
So if there was only one crew member on that train, do you think it could have been far worse?
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's why my Safe Freight Act would require trains to have at least 2 crew members, and I'm proud that my legislation has been included in the Bipartisan Rail Safety Act. Mr. Shaw, will you commit to supporting legislation requiring at least 2-person crews on all freight trains?
Senator, we'll commit to using research and technology to ensure the railroad operates safely.
Will you commit to a 2-person crew on all trains?
Senator, we're a data-driven organization, and I'm not aware of any data that links crew size with safety.
Do you disagree with Mr. Whitaker when he says that it would have been far worse? His testimony is loud and clear. It would have been worse if there's only one person as a crew on that train. Do you disagree with him?
Senator, I believe that we have operations infrastructure on the ground to respond to derailments.
I think you're not answering the question. Okay, it's almost like the last hearing all over again, because I think the evidence is very clear that these trains can be absolutely safer, but that technology is no replacement for human beings. For example, it can't perform the cognitive functions of a conductor and can't collect visual cues during an emergency. 2-person crews make our trains safer, and I wish that you would commit to that today, because I think it's pretty obvious that that is the correct answer. And I just get sick of industry executives talking about supporting the principles of regulation while they lobby against common sense regulations like this one behind the scenes. Again, let me move back over to you, Mr. Whitaker. The safety issues that plague our nation's rail system are not a mysterious, inexplicable phenomenon. They are a direct result of business decisions. So, Mr. Whitaker, do you agree that the rail industry, including Norfolk Southern, has a business model that prioritizes profit over safety?
Thank you for the question. Yes, that business model is precision scheduled railroading.
So those safety issues are not just a threat to the communities where rail companies operate, they are a threat to rail workers. In the wake of the East Palestine disaster, Norfolk Southern failed to provide proper protective equipment to the workers who cleaned up the derailment site. That is appalling. Mr. Whitaker, do you agree that rail workers should have the ability to collectively stop work when conditions threaten their health and safety consistent with the Federal Railroad Safety Act?
Thank you for the question. Yes, I do believe workers should be able to stop any and all work whenever their safety is in danger, except as it stands right now, we would be retaliated against.
And why would you be retaliated against?
Because we don't have protections on that level.
So, Mr. Shaw, do you agree that rail workers should be able to collectively stop work in unsafe and unhealthy conditions consistent with the Federal Railroad Safety Act?
Senator, I absolutely would expect our employees to operate in a safe manner. And if they are concerned about the safety of their operations, then I would expect them to address that.
Well, the rail workers are saying that your company has failed to ensure their health and safety, and they fear retribution. That's what Mr. Whitaker is saying for speaking up. Workers must be able to stand in solidarity in order to stay healthy and safe. So your response is just unacceptable, Mr. Shaw, today. And that's why I'm working on legislation to codify this union right. And I urge my colleagues to join with me. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Capito, I think. Oh, wait.
Mr. Shaw, don't look
Senator
too happy.
Vance.
You just got schooled, Shaw.
All right, thank you. Thank you all for being here. Appreciate your time. I want to start with NTSB Chair Hamandi. So you stated in Washington Post that train accidents, quote, train accidents in general per million train miles are going up, so it's trending upwards, accidents. Is that true?
I'll just go vote.
The yard accidents rates are going up. The mainline track rates are going down.
Okay. Has a spill of vinyl chloride occurred before due to a freight train derailment?
I'm sorry?
Has a spill of vinyl chloride happened due to
Yes.
one of these derailments?
Yes,
Okay.
sir, Paulsboro.
And do you remember the NTSB's recommendations at that time for a notification to first responders?
Yes, sir.
And what was that?
We had several recommendations, including providing real-time information to emergency responders, making sure that they were adequately trained and provided the appropriate gear, and that they were part of emergency planning with the locals and the railroads.
And how long ago did you make that recommendation?
2013 was the accident.
Okay, so I'll point out that 9 years ago, we made a recommendation from the NTSB that they should provide proper notification to first responders. That still hasn't happened. That's one of the reasons, by the way, why we've advanced this legislation. I want to go next to, and thank you, Chair Hamandi. I want to go next to Mr. Shaw. Mr. Shaw, I know that you have some disagreements about the precise distances necessary for wayside bearing detectors and so forth. But I wonder, could you commit to supporting a mandatory standard for hot bearing detectors, even if not our specific limits? Could you submit to supporting one in principle, assuming we could get the limits right in your view?
Yes, Senator, I absolutely appreciate your leadership and Senator Brown's leadership for the Railway Safety Act. And as we've talked about, there are a number of provisions in your bill with which we support, and it does include the wayside detectors. As you noted earlier, we're not sure what the correct spacing is. It could be 10 miles, it could be 15, could be 7.
Yep.
And I would support using science and research, and whatever is the right number, we would space wayside detectors in that manner.
Thank you. Would you commit to supporting mandatory first responder notification requirement as we do in the bill?
Yes, sir, I certainly would. And I want to take the opportunity to thank the first responders from Ohio and West Virginia and Pennsylvania who showed the courage and the commitment to the community and rushed to the scene And my appreciation for that is we just launched a regional first responder training facility in Ohio this week, and we have over 400 first responders who are signed up for it, including Chief Drebeck and 4 of his commanders.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Shaw. I'm going to go to Mr. Whitaker now. So the railroad industry claims that visual inspections are nearly useless when it comes to journal bearings. Do you believe this is true?
Thank you for the question, and I believe visual inspection is one of the most important aspects of inspecting a rail car. Also smell as well.
Thank you, Mr. Whitaker. Is it true that railroads have used human inspectors for the bulk of their history and that a key part for a rail car being inspected is a journal bearing?
That is correct.
Can you inspect a rail car adequately in 30 seconds, Mr. Whitaker, or any of your workers?
Absolutely not, sir. I would say rail car would take at least 3 minutes or longer, all in the name of safety, especially if it's hauling hazardous materials.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Mr. Whitaker. And I want to pick up there and go to Mr. Jeffries here with the minute that I have remaining. The railroads have stated in regards to their opposition to tougher inspections, quote, increased time on a task does not necessarily correlate to increased safety. And to be fair, I think that's a fair argument to make. Mr. Whitaker just said 3 minutes. I don't think we should be mandating 20-minute inspections. But I don't want to make any requirement we institute a reasonable one so businesses can comply. Mr. Jeffries, would you support a 30-second minimum in inspection time?
I can't tell you what the right time is. I can be focused on outcomes and making sure that we are addressing issues. And if there's a systemic or if there's a series of cases where failures or malfunctioning equipment isn't being caught, we need to address that. And whether that's because there's not enough time allowed, because there's not appropriate training, because of some other factor, we absolutely need to address that.
So I understand that, but I'm trying to get a specific commitment here. Do you think, we just heard from Mr. Whitaker, that he doesn't even think 30 seconds is enough time to properly inspect a railway, or excuse me, properly inspect a rail car. Do you think 30 seconds is enough to do an inspection? Would you support that as a mandatory requirement?
Well, certainly not being the technical expert, it seems 30 seconds doesn't seem like a long time to do an in-depth inspection.
Okay, I appreciate that, Mr. Jeffries. Well, I'm out of time, and I guess Acting Chairman Welch, I yield.
Thank you, Senator Vance. I think I'm next here. Mr. Shaw, Ms. Hamidi testified that this was a preventable accident. Do you agree?
Yes, thank you for that question, Senator. Yes, I do agree. And in this industry...
Stop. What should have been done to prevent it?
Senator, in this industry, we have to look at every accident as if it were preventable. And in this case, we know that the Norfolk Southern crew did everything they were supposed to do, and we thank them for that. We know that the wayside detectors were operating as designed, and we know that there were no track defects. We know that Chair Hamidi's work is focused on a wheel bearing of a privately owned rail car that no railroad owns. And so improvements in safety are going to require an industry-wide approach, which includes car owners, car builders, customers, and railroads. And Senator, many of those components are included in the Vance bill, the Vance-Brown bill.
I'm just thinking about how Misty Allison would try to figure out what you just said. I'm asking you, Norfolk, you're in charge of that train. Am I right or wrong?
Yes, sir, that's a Norfolk Southern train, and I accept responsibility.
Yeah, and then you said a privately built car, as though somehow that exempted you from the responsibility for the inspection, the assurance to the community of East Palestine that it was a safe car. You're not saying that, are you?
Sir, that was not my intent. My intent was a holistic approach.
Here's the question. It's your car. You're responsible when the train starts to when the train comes into the terminal, correct? You can't point fingers at other people. It's your responsibility to be the assurer to the community of East Palestine that a train that Norfolk Southern owns will pass through its community safely. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that is my responsibility.
Okay. So you said it was preventable. And whose responsibility was it to prevent it?
Senator, in response to this derailment.
Derailment? Not the company?
Senator, in response to this derailment, Norfolk Southern has added wayside detectors in and around of our.
But let's just get real here. Whose responsibility was it to prevent this preventable accident from happening?
Senator, we are responsible for safety on our network and working within the entire industry to enhance safety.
Okay, let me understand this. You just reluctantly acknowledged, A, it's preventable, and B, it was your responsibility to prevent it. Am I incorrect?
Senator, I'm taking responsibility to enhance safety throughout the entire industry.
Okay, this sounds like a lobbyist response. I'm taking responsibility. It's like before executives come in here, they go to charm school. And they're told to take responsibility without taking responsibility. Are you saying that it was the responsibility of Norfolk Southern, the company you lead, to have prevented this accident you acknowledge was preventable?
Senator, I think about safety each and every day. And every day since February 3rd, I've asked my team what we can do.
I only have a little more time. Let me ask this last question. I understand that the business plan of Norfolk Southern includes a $7.5 billion stock buyback that is ongoing. Do you believe it would be appropriate to suspend that buyback program until all of the assurance that you are making to this committee and also to the people of East Palestine about, quote, making this right, that stock buyback program should be suspended until you've accomplished what you've assured us and what you've assured the people of East Palestine that you would do?
Senator, we think about safety every day. We spend $1 billion a year in capital on safety, and we have ongoing expenses of about $1 billion a year in safety. And as a result, over time, derailments are down, hazardous material releases are down, and injuries are down.
So
we can always get better.
All right, so you won't answer my question about suspending the buyback program?
Senator, stock buybacks never come at the expense of safety.
Yeah, I take that is that you will continue with your plan on the buyback. My time has expired. The chair recognizes Senator Thune.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I want to offer my deepest sympathies to the residents of East Palestine, as well as express my gratitude for the first responders, NTSB investigators, and other officials who arrived and have remained on scene since the derailment. Railroads remain one of the safest ways to transport all types of freight, including hazardous materials. However, the derailment in East Palestine serves as a stern reminder of the importance of this committee's vigilance in ensuring that agencies and railroads faithfully implement and enforce requirements set in place by Congress. The strongly bipartisan FAST Act, which was signed into law in December of 2015, included an expansive hazardous materials title, much of it directly responsive to the tragic derailment at Lac-Mégantic and others like it. This title set forth new, stringent requirements for the operation of high-hazard flammable trains and a schedule for complete replacement and retrofit of all tank cars carrying Class 3 flammable liquids, both meant to reduce the impacts of future derailments. Unfortunately, other rail safety requirements from the FAST Act are still pending on the regulatory agenda, something that this committee needs to work to correct. I hope the discussion today remains focused on solutions directly responsive to what we know about the underlying causes of this derailment and avoids talk of imposing restrictive requirements that decrease the efficiency of rail operations without proven data-driven benefits to safety. Chair Homendy, first of all, I want to thank you and your team for NTSB's leadership during the response and ongoing investigation of this unfortunate accident. In response to a requirement from the Rail Safety Improvement Act of 2008, the FRA finalized the Risk Reduction Program rulemaking in 2020 and subsequently approved the plan submitted by all Class I railroads. Could you describe why a safety management system like the Risk Reduction Program is so important to managing risk and improving safety?
It's critically important, and we recommend it in all modes of transportation, that operators are proactively identifying risks and addressing them before tragedies occur. And then as well, having a just safety culture so that employees are emboldened to speak up when safety concerns arise.
Mr. Jeffries, Mr. Shaw, could you describe the implementation of the risk reduction program by railroads, specifically how it complements existing rail safety regulations?
Thank you, Senator. As you mentioned, all 7 Class 1s have RRPs in place that have now been approved by the FRA, and I think the basis of them is that each railroad, because of the unique operating characteristics of that railroad, takes a risk-based approach to addressing potential issues on its railroad. It allows the opportunity to test out ways to address that and rinse, repeat, and adjust as time goes by versus a more command and control, one-size-fits-all. So we're very early in the stage. I think there's an opportunity there to create a flexible system that allows for a much more nimble response to risk, but that story's yet to be told. But I personally think there's opportunity there and look forward to the railroads moving their programs forward.
Mr. Comstock, Section 7302 of the FAST Act required the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, or what we refer to as PHMSA, to finalize a rule requiring railroads to provide real-time emergency response information to first responders on trains carrying hazardous materials. Unfortunately, that last requirement has languished since PHMSA issued an advance notice of proposed rulemaking in 2017, despite an updated deadline of December 2022 in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. So, Chief, it seems to me that this type of information would have been extremely helpful to the first responders in East Palestine. Would you agree?
Yes, absolutely.
And Chair, your testimony mentions that NTSB has several open recommendations to PHMSA related to emergency response notification. It seems to me that the agency has simply failed to prioritize this rule. Have they provided NTSB with a better answer as to why this has been delayed?
I don't have their response on why that was delayed, but I'm happy to provide it for the record.
It would be great if you could. It seems to me at least that's a fundamental, one of the issues I think that has come out of this that would have made Mr. Comstock's and hopefully something that could have been used to avoid and mitigate the damage from this terrible derailment. My time has expired.
Can I add one thing?
Yeah.
Just to emphasize what the chief said, operations level training for firefighters. There are different levels of training. Most firefighters receive awareness level training, which is not appropriate for firefighters. At a minimum, they should have operations level training, which is a standard. And so just for consideration.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Take that to consideration.
Senator Peters.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just want to start off by thanking all of our panelists for being here today. I chair the Surface Transportation Subcommittee of this full committee, and I also want to thank Senator Brown and Senator Vance for their leadership on working to improve safety of our rail systems. My first question, though, is for you, Mr. Shaw. And Mr. Shaw, by the way, thank you for your willingness to testify here today. Your presence before 2 different committees in Congress this month should certainly underline how seriously this body takes not only this incident, but also on how important it is for us to enhance rail safety all across the industry. Over the past few months, Michiganders have seen multiple Class 1 railroad derailments in our state, leading to rail cars hanging off the side of a bridge in the city of Detroit, days-long passenger rail delays, and near-miss of hazmat incidents. Michiganders are watching what's happening in East Palestine and are rightly demanding that we do everything in our power to prevent it from happening again. And I'm certainly committed to do that, and I appreciate that you've also stated your commitment to safety in your testimony here today and our conversation that we had earlier as well. Unfortunately, though, I received data yesterday that indicates that Norfolk Southern is not yet living up to that commitment. A document that I received, which I have right here before me, a document I received shows data from Norfolk Southern's own internal servers that there are dozens of rail cars operating on trains, some of which are heading into my state of Michigan, that have gone over 5,000 miles without a Class 1 brake inspection. That's thousands of miles above what the Federal Railroad Administration regulations require. Moreover, the documents show that over 100 cars have gone over 10,000 miles, and in one case, 90,000 miles without a mechanical inspection. And this is the data just from 2 trains, so I suspect we'll have data from other trains that we look at. So, Mr. Shaw, I'd like to know, does Northern Southern have an internal standard as to how many miles before a train needs a full mechanical inspection, and how can you account for why your company appears to be running trains right now that have not been sufficiently inspected?
Senator, thank you for that question. I am not aware of that data. I can assure you that our policies are there to promote safety of our train operations, and we do not allow unsafe rail cars to operate.
Well, I'll be happy to provide what we have here, and would appreciate your comments after the hearing. One of the explanations that I've heard for inspection issues that has been at least raised to me by railroad inspectors is that there have been workforce reductions that have reduced the frequency and the quality of those inspections. So does Norfolk Southern plan to hire more inspectors to fill this gap and to make sure that trains are traveling safely?
Senator, I've got a deep appreciation and respect for my craft colleagues. And ever since I became CEO in the middle of last year, we've been on a hiring spree. We hired a near record number of employees last year, and our pipeline of conductor trainees is amongst the highest in our history right now. And several weeks ago, I reached out to the heads of our largest unions and asked them for their assistance in helping Norfolk Southern enhance our safety culture.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw. Chief Comstock, thank you for your leadership and testimony today. In your testimony, you called out the importance of passing legislation that I have to continue funding for the Assistance to Firefighters Grant Program and the Staffing for Adequate Fire and Emergency Response Grant Program to ensure that our local fire departments have the equipment that they need, the training they need, and the personnel to respond to a major hazmat incident. As you know, I have authored that legislation will hopefully become before the Senate as early as next week, the Fire Grants and Safety Act, to increase that funding. Could you please discuss how important it is for this legislation to pass and how these grants, if they were to expire, would be detrimental to small communities like yours and make it really nearly impossible to respond to disasters like what we saw in East Palestine?
You're absolutely correct. From the fire service perspective, I can't think of any grants that are more important than those. From my own department, it's permitted us to get radios, to get SCBA, to put a generator in the station that we can put the doors up when the electricity goes off. Fire departments, particularly small ones, rely on those grants every year. They're critical, and without those grants, we could not do our jobs.
Thank you for your answer. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Peters. Senator Capito.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all for being here today. Mr. Shaw, thank you for coming to our EPW hearing 2 weeks ago. Appreciate that, and appreciate everybody being here today. Mr. Shaw, question I have on the ordering of your cars. It's my understanding that this was a 149 rail car train, that on the 23rd car was carrying plastic pellets, according to the NTSB report, that lit up like a match, and then and it had that overbearing wheel bearing, and the overheating wheel bearing. And then 5 cars away were 4 cars of vinyl chloride. I guess, first of all, I would ask if that's correct. And then I know that high hazardous flammable trains have more safety regulations. Why would this not have been characterized as a high hazard flammable train if it had this hazardous materials as part of the 149 car train?
Senator, thank you for your question. I'm not familiar with the entire makeup of the train. I know that a highly hazardous train is defined by a certain number of highly hazardous cars in it or a certain number of cars in a block.
Ms. Hammondy,
Thank you, Senator.
Hammondy, sorry.
Thank you.
Maybe you can help me with that question.
Yes, the definition of a high hazard flammable train involves class 3 flammable liquids only, and 20 car loads in a continuous block, which would be a unit train, or 35 car loads of class 3 flammable liquids in a mixed freight train. That was not what was on this train. There were some that were flammable liquids, class 3 defined flammable liquids, but this train was not a high hazard flammable train.
Right, it wasn't a high hazard train, but it had high hazardous materials, obviously very flammable, that just lit up the sky. So
that's right.
Is that something that you would consider that should be looked at as a safety improvement?
Yes, Senator. We think that the thresholds of the 20 and 35 should be eliminated, and we think a broader array of hazmat should be in the definition of high hazard flammable train.
Yeah, it sounds like that would. Let me ask about the tracks. We had a derailment in Cabin Creek a couple years ago where the track, it got cold, and I think then it melted, and anyway, the track, it derailed there with some hazardous materials. How are we doing on track safety, and what kind of improvements might be in the future that if we look to this bill that Senator Vance and Brown have put together? Is this something we should look at? I know timber ties are what we're most still using. Is that the best materials to use? Are you looking at that at the NTSB or?
Yes, and track defects remain the second biggest cause of train accidents, outside of grade crossing accidents. But human factors is number 1, train defects is number 2.
Rail defects.
I'm sorry, track defects.
Track.
Sorry about that. Track defects. And there is technology, but we also think that personnel are critical as well, and that technology should supplement, not supplant.
Mr. Jeffries, did you want to address that question?
Yes, thank you. Track cause being the second leading cause on main lines, we did have the lowest number of rate of incidents in 2022, but we're not at 0. And it's important, Chair Hammondy referenced technology that can be deployed. Autonomous track inspection tools can, 1, provide a significantly more intense and sensitive type of inspection that's really 360-degree around the rail, through the rail, to identify anomalies before they become risks. And that can be attached to the back or the front of a train for continuous inspection. And that is not dehumanizing the network. That is using technology to supplement in a much more effective way the naked eye inspections that occur today. And so we believe we should be encouraging and enhancing and allowing additional pilot programs to expand that technology to take on and get this second leading cause of derailments even lower.
Let me ask a question about the communications. I'm a bit confused here listening to the testimony. When it showed that things were beginning to overheat and it passed through the 10 miles and 10 miles, does that information come directly to the engineer at the time? Mr. Whitaker, I believe it's Mr. Whitaker, yeah. And why couldn't we do that in this day and age? We have instantaneous communications. Why is that not happening? Mr. Whitaker, can you clarify that on this particular accident? And yeah, I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Thank you for the question. So technically, there's 2 different types of defect detectors. One is a standard that gives an audible to the train crew over a radio. It will tell you the defect or no defects. Would
that be like an automated voice stop, warning, or something like that?
That is correct. It sounds an alarm,
okay,
and it repeats depends on the railroad, 2 to 3 times.
Okay.
But trending defect detector technology is like a add-on to that style detector. We are not notified of a wheel trending hot on the train. That goes to a location, like a headquarters building, a wayside defect detector help desk. They monitor that car. That is the big issue. They need to convey that information to the train crews because we get a no defect alert. So we're just going down the track.
Right, right. So it seems to me that would be a huge improvement if the instantaneous communication would go directly to the engineers. The last question I have is, and they say never ask a question you don't know the answer to, but I have no idea what the answer to this. Would a different braking system on that train have made any difference? Mr. Shaw, I'll let you answer that one.
Chair Homendy was very clear that the use of ECP brakes would not have changed the result of this derailment.
Does anybody disagree with that on the panel? Yes, Chair.
So I had said it wouldn't have prevented the derailment, which is true. At car number 23, it still would have derailed, the fire would have ensued, and likely you would have still had some action on the vinyl chloride tank cars. In this case, it was a vent and burn. However, it could keep some of the cars on the train on the tracks, but FRA is doing modeling on that. It would probably be a couple of cars.
So we could have some more information on that as the investigation moves
that's
forward.
right.
Thank you all very much. Thank you. Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Ranking Member Cruz, for holding today's hearing. Illinois sits at the center of our nation's freight rail network. All 7 Class 1 railroads run through our state, including Norfolk Southern, as they all converge near Chicago. The Chicago region's freight rail network is enormous. We have 3,865 miles of rail, nearly 1,400 of which is shared by passenger trains. We see 1,300 trains a day moving through the Chicago area, which is one of the most densely populated areas in the country. To say that rail safety is important to our state would be an understatement. Yet, over the past decade, there have been at least 272 hazardous material incidents involving trains in 70 different Illinois communities. Last year, we were tied for the 3rd highest total of hazardous material incidents in the nation. The bottom line is that what happened in East Palestine could have just easily happened in Illinois. And among the causes of rail accidents are blocked rail crossings, especially among trains that are carrying hazardous materials. To address this issue, our state passed a state law in 1999 to try to limit blocked rail crossings. However, the law was unfortunately overturned in 2008 by a state Supreme Court decision due to a federal preemption. Ms. Homendy, the Bipartisan Railway Safety Act would require the U.S. Department of Transportation to issue new regulations to help prevent trains carrying hazardous materials from blocking crossings due to railroad delays. Can you explain how that would improve safety in a freight rail hub like Illinois?
Senator, the NTSB has not weighed in on the blocked crossing issue. We don't have a recommendation on that, so it's not something we've looked at.
You don't have an opinion on what a train with hazardous materials in it blocking a rail crossing?
I think it can be a safety issue, certainly for first responder access to areas in communities, and having high hazardous materials could be an issue as well.
Thank you. Over my objection, as well as that of Senator Durbin and others among the Illinois congressional delegation, the Surface Transportation Board recently approved a merger of Canadian Pacific and Kansas City Southern. This merger will likely result in more and longer freight trains through the Chicago area, particularly the northwest suburbs. Ms. Homendy, without asking you to comment on the recently approved CP and KCS merger, can you explain the safety risks that could arise if a rail company injected more and longer freight trains, some of which may be carrying hazardous materials, into an already crowded rail corridor like Chicago with such a densely populated area?
Yeah, I will say for the East Palestine train, that one was not a particularly long train in our opinion at the board. The one in Springfield was a very long train. It was a 2.55-mile train. You have workers who have to maybe go back and stop and inspect an axle, and if you're walking back 2.5 miles, that is a lot
With your equipment.
on the crew with the equipment and potential safety issues, as well as higher gross tonnage on the train, which is a big safety hazard.
Thank you. In 2021, the Federal Railroad Administration recommended penalties for 7,300 regulatory safety violations it found after inspecting railroads, hazardous materials shippers, and rail car lessors. Of those, 3,400 were assessed civil penalties for a total of $12.3 million. This is an average of $3,600 for each assessed violation. That same year, Norfolk Southern's net income was approximately $3 billion. Ms. Hamady, do you believe that the current level of civil penalties is an effective deterrent? And do you think Congress should consider raising them?
The NTSB doesn't have a position on civil penalties. I will say that most civil penalties, unfortunately, are negotiated pretty low. They will be assessed as a civil penalty, and then there is a conference portion where they will settle their penalties on pennies for a dollar.
Do you think pennies for a dollar is effective deterrent for a multi-billion-dollar company like Norfolk Southern?
I do not.
Thank you. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Senator Budd. I'm sorry, Senator Schmidt. Senator Schmidt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, East Palestine is a town that outside of East Palestine and folks in Ohio, people across the country probably hadn't heard of before this terrible tragedy. And there's a lot of towns like East Palestine. I know here in Missouri, where I'm from, Garden City, Bolton, Sykeston, Bridgeton, Missouri, where I'm from, a real blue-collar neighborhood. These are towns that aren't filled with corporate titans or elites. They're working men and women who go to church on Sunday, try to get home for dinner, take their kids to practice, try to play by the rules. And all of those towns matter. East Palestine matters. And instead of showing up in towns like this, and specifically East Palestine, this administration demonstrated that they didn't matter. Joe Biden still hasn't showed up to East Palestine. He's been to Ukraine, but not East Palestine. Pete Buttigieg, it took 3 weeks for him to show up. And I think so much of this, in addition to the things that can be improved, is a lack of attention from this administration that the people of this town, for whatever reason to them, weren't worthy of an appearance, of letting them know that we're going to support them. And so I think that one of the reasons, in addition to obviously the toxic chemical spill, that this has become such a big issue, it's demonstrative and shows that this administration is completely out of touch with what I'll refer to as flyover country, places like Missouri, places like Ohio. It just didn't matter, the Biden administration. And what's worse than all of this, I think, is that this accident was foreseeable, avoidable, preventable. And so, Mr. Shaw, I want to ask you, is it true that Norfolk Southern's accident rate has nearly doubled in the last 10 years, and at least 20 of those derailments since 2015 have involved chemical releases? Is that true?
Senator, thank you for your question. East Palestine does matter. I've been there a number of times, and I've visited with the community leaders. I've been in the homes. People have invited me to their business. I've been in the schools, and I've committed the full support of Norfolk Southern.
I hear you. You've said that, and I have limited time, but my question to you was, has the accident rate doubled in the last decade?
Senator, I am not aware of that. I'll be happy to provide you with that info. I know that from 2021 to 2022, many of our FRAs, most of our FRA safety stats improved. We will continue to get better. We are going to learn from this accident, and that's my commitment is I will lead Norfolk Southern and the industry to better safety practices.
Well, I would hope so. And, I think understanding and we're happy to educate you on those statistics that we have at our ready about how the accident rates doubled, because there's a lot of folks who live close to railroad tracks. I do. And there's a lot of folks wondering what exactly is going to be done to make sure this doesn't happen again, in addition to the things that need to happen to address the concerns at East Palestine. I did want to, with the remaining time that I have, Chair Hamady, as you know, in the aftermath of this incident, many in the media and in this administration were quick to blame the previous administration, President Trump, for not moving forward or rolling back regulations. However, those arguments have been dismissed by including the USA Today and even the Washington Post, noting that none of the regulatory changes made during the Trump administration at this point can be cited as contributing to the incident. Can you clarify to the committee today, I know you've made statements about this, just to clarify, that whether the regulatory rollback that took place under the Trump administration was responsible for this tragic incident?
I am not familiar with the all of the regulations and actions taken on those regulations from that administration. What I will say is, with my comments were with respect to electronically controlled pneumatic braking. And there were a lot of comments about how that would have prevented this derailment,
yeah, I think
which is not accurate.
Right, that was specifically cited by Pete Buttigieg, who, by the way, is not here again. I point out, I have many questions for Pete Buttigieg, and maybe he's taking more personal time, but this is now, we're few months into this Congress with a lot of serious issues involving the Department of Transportation, including this, and he just has refused to appear. And I think that you were very clear publicly saying that rule would not have impacted this at all. Is that correct?
It would not have prevented the derailment.
Correct.
Yes. Correct.
And Madam Chair, I'll yield back the rest of my time, but I do want to mention the obvious, as I just did, that Secretary Buttigieg is not here. He's yet to appear before this committee. And I think it's incredibly disrespectful, not just to this committee, but the American people, that he continues to hide from these disasters that have happened under his watch.
Senator Rosen. Senator Rosen.
Thank Senators Brown and Vance for working together in a bipartisan way to ensure that a tragedy like East Palestine derailment never happens again. And also we have to think about preventing future accidents, how we can be proactive. So in addition to transporting hazardous waste, we also transport nuclear waste by rail. And the events in East Palestine should be a wake-up call for all Americans that it's time to address how we transport hazardous materials in this country. For Nevadans, the transportation of hazardous waste to our state by rail is something we've been fighting since the 1980s. For over 30 years, we've opposed the Yucca Mountain Nuclear Waste Disposal Project, in part because it would require transporting 9,500 rail casks of hazardous radioactive waste in 2,800 trains and over 2,600 trucks from across the country to Nevada. This is a major transportation safety crisis waiting to happen, putting major metropolitan areas in 44 states, their railways, and millions of Americans at risk. We already have an aging rail system, and consistent shipments of heavy casks of nuclear waste will cause wear and tear on our railroads and could lead to the kind of disaster we saw in Ohio or worse. And so, Chair Hamady, can you talk about some of the dangers of transporting this kind of waste, nuclear waste, could pose to our nation? And even though I, along with all the Nevada delegation, are committed to ensuring that Yucca Mountain never moves forward to become a reality, I still want to ask you if you're prepared to address nuclear waste spills that could happen as a result of shipping waste on aging rail lines through American cities to places like Yucca Mountain.
Well, I will say I do believe that there are some more protective measures for moving spent nuclear fuel. However, there isn't positive train control on, say, that last mile for Nevada. And I will also mention it would be disastrous if something did occur. On our resources, we are pretty strained. The NTSB has 12 rail investigators, and we have 4 pipeline and hazardous materials safety investigators. We need to increase our investigator levels, but that requires additional resources, which we've asked Congress, and the president's budget would accomplish our request of $145 million for 2024.
Well, when it comes to safety, we should be investing in that. And I want to carry this a little bit further, because can you talk to us? You said that the positive rail control systems, they're not in Nevada. So we hope that would tell us if that would be beneficial. And can you also tell us, are the trains carrying nuclear waste? Do they have their wheel bearings checked regularly? And what kind of regular checks are you doing to be proactive as we may be transporting some of this additional hazardous waste across the country?
They would be checked regularly, but I would have to defer to Mr. Jeffries on the exact requirements for those train inspections.
The federal government has established strict standards for transport of spent nuclear fuel and has determined that the railroads are the safest mechanism for doing so. I know my team would be happy to sit down with you and your team to talk about the specifics of the requirements there, but it is something that we would take with the utmost of seriousness, the responsibility that the government has delegated to our industry to move those cars with the highest level of safety.
Thank you. I look forward to talking about that, because I want to be sure that we're being stringent enough. And I want to move to another topic, very important to Nevada. It is reliable freight rail for our tourism economy, because Nevada, we're the nation's leader in tourism and hospitality service. It's a sector that relies heavily on freight rail to bring in goods from out-of-state partners to support our industry. And the Interstate 15 corridor, which runs from California to Nevada, it is crowded. It makes it difficult for trucks to move efficiently, and it makes reliable freight rail service along the corridor all that more important. So, Mr. Jeffries, how do you think Congress can support more reliable freight system that moves goods quickly but still promotes safety as its core priority?
Well, thank you for that. We're a service provider at the end of the day, and if we're not providing good, reliable service, then we're not doing our jobs. And I think the pandemic and the associated supply chain challenges really illustrated that. The railroads have been making significant progress on the service front, and as Mr. Shaw mentioned and I mentioned in my opening, significant hiring efforts continue. We're at our highest level of employees that we've been in over 3 years, and really it's about taking things to the next step. We've seen the Amazonification of the world. Folks want to know exactly where their things are, exactly when they're going to get there, exactly when the pepperoni's going on the pizza that they've ordered, when that's going to be delivered. And so railroads need to work to provide increased visibility into where their shipments are to their customers, increased predictability, and those efforts are underway, and there's some exciting things on the horizon. Thank you.
Thank you. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Fisher.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The East Palestine train derailment has increased our public awareness of rail safety concerns, especially for trains that are moving through very rural, small communities like those in my home state of Nebraska. This committee takes rail safety very seriously. Modern technologies can enhance railroad safety, especially in how rail cars and tracks are inspected. Mr. Jeffries, can you explain how a two-pronged inspection system using visual and automated track inspections can improve rail safety?
Thank you for that, and thank you for your efforts on rail safety. You're exactly right. A two-pronged approach to track inspections is the appropriate path forward. So as we've discussed, autonomous track inspection tools allow for not only a continuous inspection of track as a train goes over it, but at a much higher level of sensitivity, a much higher level of effectiveness. Has been found to be 90% more effective in identifying flaws in the track before they become serious risks. And several pilot programs have been in place with some of our railroads at the FRA. Unfortunately, literally had to sue the FRA to expand those pilot programs and recently won in court the ability to do that. It's a shame that it took that level of effort for a proven safety technology, but it is a two-pronged approach. ATI doesn't catch everything, and it doesn't do every job that a human inspector does. So we absolutely still need the human inspection capabilities, and hopefully our inspectors are also spending more time addressing found anomalies than using the naked eye walking the tracks. And again, there's a place for both, and it's a complementary approach that I think will result in a much higher level of safety, which should be the ultimate goal for everybody.
Yeah, that is the ultimate goal. That's what we're trying to get at here. So what's impeding the use of those automated technologies throughout the whole rail network?
Right. Well, we're going to take things step by step as we deploy this technology, for one. But two, we need a regulatory environment. We need a regulator that promotes innovation, promotes technology, promotes pilot programs, identifying new ways of doing things,
so
allows you to build a data set so you don't have to go to court. And let's have the opportunity to experiment with things. Some technologies may not work out. Others may prove to have dramatic safety benefits. Let's build the data sets that then we can objectively analyze in partnership with the regulator to advance safety.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Shaw, as you're aware, the current law dictates common carrier obligations that railroads must abide by. Specifically, railroads must transport any freight under reasonable terms, including hazardous materials. Mr. Shaw, can you explain how the common carrier obligation impacts the way that your railroad transports hazardous material in coordination with shippers?
Yes, thank you for that question, Senator. Rail remains one of the safest forms of handling hazardous materials. We do have a common carrier obligation to handle product. We work very closely with our customers, with our fellow railroaders, and with elected officials and with the regulatory body to handle that in the safest manner possible. And I'll note that in 2022, our derailments were the fewest that they've been in the last 2 decades.
What obligation do shippers have, if any, on maintaining their rail cars that transport these hazardous materials?
Senator, as you know, there are many components of the Vance-Brown bill that we fully support. And the rail industry has been advocating and pushing for stronger tank car standards for about the last 8 years, is my understanding, and that is included in the bill.
Okay, thank you very much. I just have a couple short questions here, Mr. Jeffries, for you. When I talk to my constituents in Nebraska, one of the items I hear about frequently is community notification. Folks just want to know what dangerous things could possibly be moving through their towns and cities while still maintaining the security that's needed, that information is controlled in a way, because we all know that there's a lot of people out there that would like to cause mischief. That would be disastrous.
Right.
In the FAST Act, which I helped to author, it added notice requirements that we did it in a way that provided first responders the information they needed, again, ensuring that the local actors wouldn't have access to that. Those rulemakings haven't been completed, is my understanding. Do freight railroads agree that appropriate community notification is necessary? And what part do they play in ensuring that communities do have that information?
It is absolutely necessary, and we 100% agree with that assessment. And you're right, the rule was supposed to be done, I think, a year after the FAST Act, and so it's 7 years overdue. We didn't wait around. We developed our own mechanism to get information into first responders' hands. But we need help building awareness. We just sent letters out to every firefighter association in each state trying to build awareness. We're shifting towards versus a responder by responder sign-up process to a emergency communications center model, because to Senator Vance's point earlier, if you're in a rural area, you don't necessarily have cell service, but there's a requirement that you always have radio service, to my knowledge, with the Emergency Communications Center. So if the Emergency Communications Center has that access, the first responder can quickly get that from there. But we've got more work to do, and look forward to working with Congress for further ways to get that information into those hands who need it.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Lujan.
Thank you, Chair Cantwell, and Ranking Member Cruz for this important hearing, and want to begin by recognizing Senator Brown and Senator Vance for coming together and responding so quickly, and appreciate their staff and the work that they're doing. I also want to thank Ms. Allison for being part of that panel today. I think all too often the impact to a family or to a person are left out. And just want to say thank you for helping the country, those of us here in the Senate, better understand what the family has gone through. And it just reminds me that it shouldn't take a tragedy like this for there to be action. I appreciate everyone coming together now. It's the right thing to do. But why didn't we do it before? There's incidents all across the country where there's derailments. There's been conversations about reductions in workforce. You have less people looking at something, there's going to be a problem. It's not going to be identified until after something horrific happens. We all know the challenges, and one of my frustrations since being here in the Senate and the House is you go through these efforts and we fight for rules and we thank each other and we recognize each other for that work, and then it goes to be implemented. And then all the folks that didn't want the legislation get another crack at this, and then they mess it up over where there's a rulemaking or an implementation, and then there's a bunch of filings, which I'm one of those folks that reads filings, that create a bunch of loopholes. But then there's interviews that come after that, and they, oh no, we wanted all this stuff done. I certainly hope there's a lesson here, and on this one, that with all these filings, every word is watched, every statement is watched, and that loopholes are not being advocated for by the groups that have been hired to represent companies or represent interests, only to allow for something like this to happen again. I hope we're mindful to that. Now, a week ago, a train derailed in a small community in Arizona, in Mojave. And just hours before, as you can imagine, that these trains, go through small town after small town. It was in New Mexico. And my question here is around first responders as well, because when this happened, the initial reports that went to law enforcement was that there was a high concern of hazardous materials being carried on that train. It was corn syrup. So while I appreciate information was shared, that doesn't sound to me like first responders are being looked after when they're getting to an incident like this. There needs to be a better way of sharing accurate and timely information. I appreciate the questions of my colleague, Ms. Fisher, as well in this particular area, but I'm hopeful more can be done there. And that's where, Madam Chair, how can the process be improved to ensure that once a derailment happens, the first responders quickly receive the information they need to appropriately respond?
They needed advance notification. I do appreciate what the railroads have done with the Ask Rail app. The problem is when you have a derailment and train cars are bunched up, when you're pulling up a consist from the Ask Rail app, it goes by car in order. If you're looking at a derailment with cars all over the place, again, bunched up, you're not going to know what's in what car. So that's not helpful. But the first responders need advance.
Let me pause you there. Can that be fixed?
I'll have to get back to you on that.
Yeah. If that's a problem, before we have an incident, we know it exists today, and if that's broken in the system, let's fix it.
Advance notification for the first responder community is key because they need to be prepared. They need to be adequately trained. They need the right gear, and they need to have emergency response planning done in coordination with the railroads so that they can be prepared in case something happens.
I certainly agree with that, but I want to bring attention to the challenge that you identified, and I appreciate you identifying it. But if that system's in place, but there's not communication because cars are close to one another, but you know what's in there, I just hope that that's something that can be fixed, because someone knows what's in there. And I'll leave it at that. Mr. Whitaker, first, thank you for your testimony and your work representing Ohio's rail workforce. You stated in your testimony that since 2015, Class 1 railroads have cut over 30% of their workforce, and I mentioned that in my opening. Mr. Whitaker, yes or no, would expanding the workforce have a concrete impact on improving outcomes when it comes to safety?
Thank you for the question. Yes, it would. Adding to the workforce would definitely strengthen inspections. We would be able to reduce fatigue on people as well, the train crews.
Let me center on what you just said on fatigue. Would paid leave help? If people are getting worn out and tired and things of that nature as well, and you want fresh eyes so we don't see mistakes, would that help?
Absolutely. Right now we have people that go to work sick with the flu, COVID, whatever the case may be, and they're afraid to take time off because if they mark off sick, they get reprimanded.
I appreciate that. I'm sure my time's expired. I certainly appreciate this hearing. There's so many questions I have. I'll submit the rest into the record. But to everyone that's helping the families, thank you for what you're doing. Please, no loopholes. Filings, rulemakings, we can all do better at that. And I certainly hope that's something that we can embrace. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and I want to thank you all for being here for the hearing today. And I know that everyone is hard at work trying to help the people of East Palestine. I so appreciated the governor's remarks at the outset, and I know that my colleague, Senator Vance, has really worked hard to bring some attention to this community. Chief Comstock, I want to come to you. It is my understanding that the AAR, in partnership with emergency management agencies in Sumner County, Tennessee, piloted the addition of AskRail data to their emergency management dispatching system. And following the derailment there in East Palestine, firefighters were on the ground for 90 minutes, but could not access the AskRail app to get information about what substances were on board the train. Ms. Homendy did an interview in which she said that none of the first responders actually had the app on their devices at all. So can you give me a little bit more information about how the AskRail app may have been used and whether first responders are making effective use of the app, and what are the requirements around using that app?
First of all, thank you for the question. With respect to requirements to use the app, I am not aware of any. As to the effective use of the app, I asked my own department members as to how many are using that app presently. I will tell you I have that on my phone, but I found that 50% of the firefighters had that app, a much higher percentage with respect to our department's officers. I know one of the complicating factors at East Palestine was the fact that the rail cars were off the track. They were bunched up in a ladder-style formation. Keep in mind it was night. You had burning cars and smoke, so it was, and some of the placards had burned off. It was, and you have to try to use that at somewhat of a safe distance. So it can be difficult. I think it is a good app, but it can be used more. We need to have better education. That goes hand in hand with the training that we've discussed and advocated for. I also would add this with respect to technology. There are apps that I have on my phone that when a car flips, the OnStar information or others will be relayed to the app. One example is I Am Responding /Rapid SOS that gathers technology, sends it to my dispatcher. My dispatcher gets that to me on my phone. So en route to a motor vehicle accident, I know that the car's flipped 3 times, the airbag's gone out, and that it has information about that car, whether it's electric car, things that I have to be worried about. So I should be able to get that information about trains, I think.
Well, Mr. Jeffries, let me come to you. What is your understanding for how the app was used or was not accessed during the incident?
So based on what I've read, I believe it was accessed, but I don't have details by who and how. To be clear, there is it is free to all first responders, and to date, we have taken a responder by responder approach, which there are a lot of first responders in this country, and having 35,000 with the app is absolutely not sufficient, not where we need to be. That's why we're shifting to an emergency communications center approach, also knowing that, as I understand it, first responders will always have access to the Emergency Communications Center, and so that's a central repository that has that information. Responders individually can still download the app, but we are wide open to looking at ways and working with Congress and others in the first responder community to further penetrate that population, to get it into as many people's hands as possible.
So you would say the app is not working?
I think the app works very well, designed what it's to do. It's making sure that everybody who we get it in as many people's hands as possible, and going responder by responder is a slow, meticulous way to achieving that.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Yes, Senator Hickenlooper.
Thank you. Let me ask a question, Mr. Jeffries. The rail sector plays a crucial role in transporting goods throughout our nation. And I want to talk about a specific rail project in the West that is reportedly seeking a $2 billion private activity bond from DOT. And that would be a taxpayer-funded subsidy for a project that has raised a number of concerns among community leaders in Colorado. And its costs have gone up significantly. This type of DOT bond has traditionally been issued for projects with a clear public transportation benefit. Are you aware of any examples of DOT private activity bonds issued primarily for transportation of commodities for private sale?
Senator, I am not aware of any. I would not say that means there absolutely haven't been any, but I'm certainly not aware of any.
Okay, well, if you could follow up on that, that would be great.
I'd be happy to.
And Chairwoman Hammondy, you've gone over in some detail the high hazard flammable train definition, and the train carrying 20 or more tank cars, class 3 or 35 tank cars. I guess one question I would be curious about is what other risk factors, such as proximity to natural resources, should be considered when providing notice of a high hazard flammable train?
Well, I think that should be considered for a high hazard flammable train. Also, just to clarify for the record, and I know this is your time, none of the responders had access to the app, and they didn't have the information for quite a long time on what was on the train. With that said, Senator, for this one, I do believe that environmentally sensitive areas and sensitive waterways should be considered, especially for routing of trains and for protections.
Thank you. I appreciate that and agree. Chief Comstock, thank you and all your first responder colleagues for your dedication and public service. The images that we saw from East Palestine were horrific. Not just the environmental destruction, but I mean the homes, community, the lives destructed. The statistic I was shown says that hazardous material cars involved in derailments have increased 339% from 1986 to 2021. You discussed the need for all fire departments serving rural communities to have access to training to safely respond to hazardous material incidents, things such as this. Could more resources be provided by the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration to increase safety training and response capacity for fire departments?
Yeah, particularly, we've talked about the hands-on training, and there's a lot of firefighters who, as I said, can't take time off work. So we need to not only have the good hands-on, which I think the railway industry is looking at trying to increase, but we also need to find ways to deliver that to where the firefighters work every day. There's a lot of departments, particularly in these areas, that don't have those resources, so we need to be creative and find ways to get that to those departments in the rural areas, and that's whether it's going to be through the use of technology or through more home delivery programs like the NVFC is operating. That's how we're going to have to do it, but we need to devote more resources.
And what role should rail companies play in ensuring communities have adequate resources to plan for, but also to respond to rail disasters?
Well, they're going to have to play a major part, and it's going to have to be a partnership with everybody who has an interest in this issue. We need to work with the railways; they need to work with us, and I think that's going to be a continued improved result as a result of this hearing and the derailment.
Great, thank you, Chief. And Chairwoman Hamady, you agree with that response in terms of the participation of the railroads as well?
Absolutely. We've had recommendations that are still open on ensuring that the railroads participate in local emergency response planning and helping provide resources, including appropriate training.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank all of you for your testimony. I yield back to the chair.
You. Senator Warnock.
Thank you, Chair Cantwell. Norfolk Southern is headquartered in Atlanta, and it runs an extensive operation in Georgia that includes 1,700 miles of track, 600 bridges, 2,700 railway highway grade crossings, and a number of rail yards and transfer facilities in cities across the entire state, a multimodal state. That's a lot of Norfolk Southern rail in Georgia. And I can't help but see the accident in East Palestine and wonder what would have happened had we, instead of watching this in Ohio or witnessing this or experiencing it in Georgia. Mr. Shaw, can you give me and the people of Georgia confidence that we won't see an accident like this in Georgia?
Senator, thank you for the question. I'm terribly sorry for the derailment in East Palestine, and we're working every day to make Norfolk Southern and the rail industry safer. We've seen the preliminary results from the NTSB investigation, and we've made a number of enhancements to our own safety program in response. We've worked with industry to enhance safety and put in more safety features. And there are many aspects of the Vance-Brown bill that we fully support to enhance rail safety. We are a safe railroad. The number of derailments on Norfolk Southern was the lowest last year that it's been in the last 2 decades. Senator Warnock, I'm fully committed to enhancing safety for Norfolk Southern and for the entire industry.
And that's good to hear, and the work that you want to do. Could you speak more specifically, what more needs to be done, in your view, to protect our citizens and our neighbors from accidents like this?
Thank you, Senator. We have announced that we are enhancing our hot bearing detector network. We're adding 200 hot bearing detectors to our network. We're piloting next generation hot bearing detectors. We're working with the industry on best practices for safety. We are deploying more acoustic bearing detectors across our network, and we are installing a digital inspection portal that we are piloting with Georgia Tech outside of East Palestine to inspect passing trains and catch things that the human eye cannot catch. We will continue to invest in safety. We spend over $1 billion a year in capital on safety and over $1 billion a year in ongoing operating expenses.
Is there anything that you didn't have in place during this accident, and I know hindsight is 20/20, that you wish you had had in place?
You know, what I can point you to is some of the steps that we're taking now based on the preliminary results of the NTSB investigation. I certainly look forward to fully cooperating with the NTSB throughout the full investigation and look forward to their results.
So I have to tell you, as I move across the state, and you and I have had a chance to talk, and we will keep that communication line open. But I have to tell you that as I move across the state and I talk to Norfolk Southern workers, I'm hearing from rail workers that policies around their working conditions are creating safety issues and may have contributed to this accident. Do you believe your company's worker policies contributed to this in any way?
Senator, our policies are there to promote the safety of train operations. I, too, have been fully engaged with our valuable craft colleagues. My first day as CEO, I went out into the field and I walked into the crew room, and I've engaged with our employees, and I've thanked them for their service to Norfolk Southern, their service to our customers, and their service to the United States. And since I became CEO, Senator, we've been on a hiring spree, and we now have 1,500 more employees than we did this time last year.
So how are you working with those employees and labor on any changes that you're considering? And what have you learned from the accident that might result in changes to your worker policies?
Senator, I'm committed to improving the safety culture at Norfolk Southern and throughout the industry, and I have reached out to the heads of our two largest labor unions and asked them for their assistance and their input on how we can advance safety at Norfolk Southern.
Great. Thank you so much, and I look forward to working with you and with labor and all of your colleagues to do everything we can and to make sure everything's being done to ensure the safe operation of our nation's rail infrastructure.
Thank you, Senator Warnock. It's been an interesting hearing, for sure, a lot of information, but I'd like to get some clarity because we do want to move legislation in this area. I do want to start with some information, though. My state is definitely seeing, there's a debate here about are we seeing an increase in derailments. My state definitely it's great that we had a witness who's actually a marketing expert because Ms. Allison said you can always take numbers and make them mean different things. So I'm just letting you know this is a 10-year window in my state. We've definitely seen an increase in derailments. And because we carry so much oil, it's always an issue for us in these communities. It goes through every area. So I wanted to start with you, Ms. Hamady, as it relates to legislation I originally introduced in 2015 saying let's get rid of DOT 111s, and now in the infrastructure bill we got a 2029 date. This legislation says let's do it by 2025. Do you agree that that's the right?
Yes, the NTSB agrees that we should move up the date and eliminate the DOT 111s from hazmat service, not just from Class 3 flammable liquid service, but all hazmat service in this train. We had 16 DOT 111s carrying hazmat. Only 3 of them, though, would be covered under that final rule in the FAST Act.
Okay, do the rest of the witnesses agree?
100%. We filed jointly with shippers in 2011 to upgrade 111s, and following the 2014 rule, came to Congress because there was a 20-car loophole, there wasn't thermal protection, there weren't top fittings protection, so we're 100% on board. It's got to be done in a way that the manufacturers can achieve.
I'm asking you whether you support the legislation to move the date to 2025.
I support moving it forward as feasibly as possible.
2025?
whatever the manufacturers can make happen.
Mr. Shaw?
Yes, we support the component of the Vance-Brown bill for accelerating safer tank car standards.
Okay, let's turn to other issues, if we could, on your investments. One of the things I want to ask you about, Mr. Shaw, is you've been talking about how you've had less derailments, but I'm pretty sure we've seen an increase in accidents. We think of 14%. And so this issue is about the number of accidents. Ms. Hamady was talking about this video issue of the DuPont accident. And so it doesn't matter, issues are issues. And at the same time period as this increase, 14%, we also have, you stated earlier that you invested $1 billion in safety last year. That was at the EPW hearing. However, data from your company provided to the Surface Transportation Board says you've cut network investments by 30% in just 5 years, and at the same time, accident rates increased by 60%. Meanwhile, the company made a record $4.2 billion in profits. So this is a discussion about, are we putting the right resources into the network? Are we putting the right resources, in your opinion?
Yes, Senator, we are. We're investing over $1 billion a year in safety improvements. Our capital budget over the last couple of years overall has increased about 30%. We're hiring at a record clip.
But this chart shows that you've had this is your own information from the Surface Transportation Board, a 25% decrease in infrastructure investment and a 22% decrease in the number of employees.
Senator, when I became CEO of Norfolk Southern in May of last year, we went on an aggressive hiring spree, and that continues to this date. And I'll note that last year, the number of derailments on Norfolk Southern was the lowest in the last 2 decades.
I think that Ms. Allison made it quite clear the damaging impact of these accidents and lasting impacts on our children. No, you can't look at that stat you're saying and feel comfort. She can't put her kids to bed at night and feel comfortable about that. So what we have to do is figure out, are we shortchanging infrastructure investment? This is an issue across the board, in aviation, in transportation, here at the rail. We're not going to take profits over safety investments. We are going to require, now I don't even think that's good business, but here we're going to make sure that those investments are made across the board for safety. So I want to get to this issue as it relates to the workforce. Particularly this issue of what role they play in the inspection process. Do you think that the current system works, or do you think we need more enhancements there in workforce? The Brown-Vance bill obviously increases the workforce. Some of the testimony by Mr. Whitaker would say that we need more on the workforce side.
Senator, with respect to the Brown-Vance bill, we certainly support the provision that requires FRA audits of railroad compliance with railcar safety inspection programs. We also fully support the concept of a triennial review of railcar safety standards.
A triennial review. What does that mean?
Senator, my understanding is there's a provision in the bill that allows for updates every 3 years.
Okay. So you're saying, okay. If we could look at this chart here, that in March 17th, we asked you to send us information about standards here. And you stated that Norfolk Southern does not have policies that mandate a minimum or maximum amount of time needed for the inspection of a rail car. And yet this information shows that it is part of this document for rail car inspection that you are saying to your employees that the cycle time for a 50-car cut is at 0.5 minutes per car with one inspection. So that's saying you have to inspect one side of that car within 30 seconds. Mr. Whitaker, do you know about this?
I'm aware of this issue here. I know there's 90 points per side of a rail car that need to be inspected. Conductors, we know how to inspect most of those, but a mechanical force person, always attribute they have the doctorate degree and they need to take their time, and we should not be putting safety on a timeline here when inspecting rail cars. We're going through communities with hazardous materials and very unforgiving equipment.
I agree, safety should not be on a timeline. So, Mr. Shaw, what's going on here? I think you don't support the Brown bill as it relates to a requirement of more people than just the conductor on a rail car. But this is just an example of how I think the system is being shortchanged. And while the information age gives us all sorts of ideas about efficiency, we can't take that to the extreme when you end up cutting safety. And the safety standards, we have to have minimum safety standards, we have to have modernization of safety technology, and we have to have the minimum amount of people to do the job. So that's what's going to be required across every sector of transportation. And this committee is going to make sure that we get there, because we're not going to let people just keep, putting money in the bank and thinking that you can shortchange safety. We can't shortchange Miss Allison, and we can't shortchange East Palestine. So what are your thoughts about at least getting rid of this notion that it's 30 seconds?
Senator, I'm not familiar with a minimum or a maximum on rail car inspection duration. We do support evidence-based approach to enhance safety and improve outcomes for the industry, for our customers, and the communities we serve.
Well, maybe you can find somebody in your organization to get you this document, but it's clearly your document, and it's clearly what's being implemented. And I don't think it's the standard that we want, and I don't think it's a safe idea. Now, I'd like to go to this larger issue, which we might be able to get some agreement on. Mr. Comstock, in the underlying bill is requirement for training of local firefighting teams on dealing with this kind of material. Is this enough? Is there enough in there? Or do we need to put something in here about equipment? I asked the first panel about this.
I think it goes hand in hand. I mean, I think we have to have training, but I think we have to have specialized equipment, whether it's for monitoring or suits. And I also raised in my initial submittal that we need second set of turnout gear. And the best example for everyday firefighting is we have one set of turnout gear. And when I have to wash that, I'm out of service. In this rail car instance, I had 3 firefighters who were exposed. Their gear is contaminated. I can't use it. It takes 6 months to get replacement gear. That means I have 3 firefighters who are out of service for 6 months who can't respond to auto accidents or to structure fires. I was able to find 1 spare set of gear, and on 2 I had to rent some. So we have, throughout this country, we're lucky in many departments have good 1 set of gear. Departments that have money have 2 sets, so you can wash 1. And so that's just an everyday use that we need. And then when it comes to equipment on a hazmat incident, the specialized suits, which can cost $15,000 or more, or the specialized monitoring equipment, it's unrealistic for the federal government to provide that to every department. But we do need to look at a regional approach so we can call in those teams that can supplement what we're trying to do.
So we need to do more than what we have in the bill.
Yes,
in the
thank
underlying
you.
bill.
Yes.
I know this already from my work in 2015. Trust me, I already know
Yes.
this because I've talked to lots of firefighters across the state of Washington, and believe me, rail goes everywhere in our state. So, Mr. Shaw, are you willing to support what's in the underlying bill? Are you willing to do more than in the underlying bill to make sure local firefighting teams have the equipment they need?
Senator, we absolutely support what's in the underlying bill, and we are willing to do more to support firefighters. We just opened up a regional training facility in Ohio for first responders.
Yeah, I'm thinking something a little different. I think, this committee has dealt with the Oil Spill Trust Fund. Senator Stevens did great work on that. It literally is about having the resources up front in in a timely manner to have in a community. And the challenge here is going to be to figure out how to do that and where to do that. But I think if we're going to continue to move product like this and have this level of risk, we can't just leave it up to volunteer firefighters to be on the front line. So I do think we have to think about what is a way to put resources into the local community. So I appreciate the fact that you're willing to consider that. Mr. Jeffries,
I was
did you
just going
want
to
to
say,
comment?
100% agree, and would love to work with the committee on how we best approach that.
Great, great, like that. Okay, Ms. Hamady, did you have a comment about that?
A great place to look is PHMSA's Hazardous Materials Emergency Preparedness Program, which is about $28.3 million annually and has been there like that for years. It needs to increase. It is paid for by fees from the shippers and the transporters of hazmat.
Okay, so good. We get some consensus there. Okay, and what about, in general, the what we covered? One thing I actually isn't in there, Bill. I don't think the video that you brought up earlier is in there. But you're saying, Ms. Hamady, that there should be some video communication. You're saying that there is missing video from this accident. Is that what you're saying? I don't know what I want to. Okay, you're just saying you don't have video. That it wasn't required, but there was video, but we don't have it because the engine moved on and went somewhere else and was videotaped over.
Yes.
Okay. And in the DuPont accident, you were mentioning how valuable that was. Why was it valuable in the DuPont accident?
Very valuable. First, some assumed early on, not us, that there was distraction in the locomotive cab, and we could see in the video that that did not occur. We also could see that there was some hesitation by the engineer around the controls. It was a new locomotive, and we determined through the investigation, including looking at the video, that they weren't provided adequate training, the train crew.
Okay.
So right now, the requirement is on, the requirement in law is on Amtrak and the commuter railroads, not on the Class 1 freight railroads, and we would advocate for that.
Mr. Whitaker?
I'd just like to piggyback on what the chair is saying. In regards to training, these Class 1 railroads have reduced their training programs down to bare minimum. When I hired on the railroad in 2000, I had 26 weeks of training. Nowadays, it's 6 weeks or less on these Class 1 railroads. We're hauling 200-plus car trains and hazardous materials, and that's not right. You're putting too much pressure on employees right now with inadequate training. And I'm sure these numbers, I would be curious to see what the retention rate is. I know Mr. Shaw brags about how much they've hired people. What's the retention rate of people sticking around? I'm an advocate for two-person crew, obviously, but if I'm not hearing the CEO of my company tell me I'm going to have a job, I'm going to be looking somewhere else.
Mr. Whitaker, what standards should we be looking at, given that we have had this transformation into longer trains? I don't think we've heard this intermittently through the committee, but this is a sea change.
Right. So to Ms. Hamady's point about how much technology is on a locomotive, as an engineer by craft, I'm looking at 4 computer screens. I am busy. I don't even have time to look out the window of my locomotive half the time. I'm depending on the conductor over there to be my eyes and ears and keep me in check. Enhanced training for that conductor would greatly assist the locomotive engineer, greatly. And I think in the railroad industry as a whole, we've lost a lot of our expertise over the years because we have people that have zero railroad experience running our railroads. We could be so much more efficient and do so much better if railroad management would just listen to labor. We could move trains without incident. We could make things more safe, but they just got to listen.
What would you have done in this instance, do you think, given that we were talking about a wheel bearing?
What I feel should have been done with the trending defect detector technology, and this is something going back to last year that I sounded a whistle on. We need to eliminate trending defect detector, keeping that information to ourselves in our headquarters. Okay, let's just take the chance. Let's move this train on down the line. That's what they're doing. What should happen?
You're saying that they knew that this train had a weak spot? Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely.
You're saying they knew the train had a weak spot?
If they're trending defect detector, according to the NTSB report that I've read, they've seen this car trend hotter and hotter over the course of 3 detectors, I believe. That information is going to somebody at Norfolk Southern, and they're not conveying that information to the railroad crews.
Mr. Shaw, did someone at Norfolk Southern have that information?
Senator, my understanding from the NTSB report is once the train hit the 3rd detector, which showed that we hit the threshold, then the crew acted appropriately. However, the part had already failed.
Why did you keep putting the car on is the question. I think Mr. Whitaker is saying you should have had a signal. Listen, this is definitely where this is where I'm going. I don't know, I'll have to ask Senator Cruz and my other colleagues where they're going, but I'm telling you right now, we are going to use transparency and technology and make sure that people are getting that information as fast as possible. We are going to use NTSB to help us hold the FAA accountable, and we're going to help them, as they are today, hold this accountable. We have to look at safety trends. We have to look at what's coming at us because they are telling us in advance. That's what technology can do, tell us in advance where there's a problem. But we can't ignore that because we want to make some more money. We have to go and say, we're going to make the investment and we're going to make sure everybody has the information, and that's how we keep on top of safety. Ms. Hamady?
I would just add, so in Atlanta, Norfolk Southern has an advanced train control desk, and what they saw there at the 2nd wayside defect detector was a non-critical alert. It wasn't a critical alarm because the threshold at the time was 103 plus about 10 degrees from underneath the train of above ambient. And so they got a critical alarm at the last one, but by that time, the train was in the process of derailing because there is a little bit of a delay. The crew will get information, but at the train control desk, the entire train needs to move past that wayside detector before the train control desk has that information. With that said, they're also at the same time dealing with other trains that may have warm or hot bearings.
So you're saying, I don't, Mr. Whitaker, what are you saying? That before this, knowing that the information was there, something should have happened on these cars, and somebody, if you would have had the information and the workforce would have had the information, they would have asked for some further inspection. Is that what you're saying?
That is what I'm saying. When you're on a train and you're passing over a defect detector, if that detector senses a wheel bearing hits a threshold, we hear a beep alarm. That tells me as a locomotive engineer, all right, I'm not going to apply the train brakes on the train because I don't know what's wrong with them. I'm going to go into what's called dynamic braking, which slows the locomotive down and slows the train down. So I'm going to come to a safe stop, and once I clear that detector, it's going to tell me what's wrong. But in this case, if I see my tire pressure on my car losing air, I'm going to pull over and stop and check that out, right? If I own a railroad and I see a wheel heating up, I'm going to protect my investment, and I'm going to call that train crew. Hey, I know you're not meeting the threshold here, but maybe you guys need to stop and go back and check this out. It could be something, a handbrake applied on a car or a stuck brake, something that could be addressed right then and there. So once it starts trending, we need to stop and check it out, no matter if we don't even hit that threshold. Let's take the safest course of action.
Thank you. All right, Senator Cruz, thank you. Do you have a follow-up for second round? Sorry, I kind of took my first and second round together, but I think we're nearing the end for our witnesses. You've been very patient, and thank you for putting We've been here for long time here, so we appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. This has been, I think, a productive hearing, a useful hearing. Mr. Jeffries, I want to start with this. Listen, I think everyone here is concerned about enhancing safety standards to minimize the risk of derailments. And I think there is bipartisan interest in moving rail safety legislation. I think we're going to be successful in doing that. At the same time, we want to enhance safety. We want to protect the interest of consumers. And I will say there are portions of the Brown bill as currently drafted that concern me, in particular giving significantly more authority to the Department of Transportation. This Department of Transportation, their policies created a supply chain crisis in the last 2 years that drove up costs and increased scarcity for consumers all across the country. And the Biden administration has also demonstrated a deep animus to energy. And I would certainly be concerned about giving Secretary Buttigieg the authority to make it significantly more difficult to transport energy in the United States and to drive up cost for consumers. In your judgment, Mr. Jeffries, what are the provisions in the current draft of the bill that concern you, and in particular, what could be the negative consequences for consumers of Secretary Buttigieg having too much authority to drive up costs?
Well, thank you for that. And I very much appreciate the question. Contrary to statements that have been made, the AAR has not taken a position on this bill. Frankly, I think there's a feasible path forward on almost every provision in there. Now, your definition of feasible and mine may not be the same, but I think there's an opportunity to work together to try to get to yes. I think the provision you're asking about is one that would apply, I think, upwards of 12 new rulemakings around any train that's moving at least one car of hazmat. Over 40% of trains move with at least one car of hazmat. Now, that could be a flammable gas. It could also be asphalt. And in my view, I'm not sure applying those same levels of restrictions for flammable gases and asphalt makes a lot of sense because of the overarching impacts it can have on the network overall, the impacts it can have on energy shippers, the impacts it can have on ag shippers, the impacts it can have on intermodal premium shippers, similar to UPS. Now, does that mean that nothing should be done? Absolutely not. I think there's a logical case to be made for a parallel requirement for trains carrying flammable gases as we currently have for flammable liquids. But it's about taking a risk-based approach that doesn't treat the entire class of commodities the same, but really focuses on what is truly a higher risk train versus one that's that perceives little risk. So there's a path forward there, and I think we just need to target what we're actually focused on here.
Well, thank you. That is helpful, and we will certainly commit to working with you to try to find a solution that enhances safety while at the same time protecting the interest of consumers. Mr. Shaw, you and I talked yesterday, and you described that Norfolk Southern was a proponent of venting and burning the vinyl chloride from all 5 tanks. At least one of the tanks was significantly injured. There has been disagreement as to whether the other 4 tanks were compromised or not. Will you commit to providing this committee with any and all information you have as to the condition of all 5 of those tank cars?
Yes, we will be transparent with the committee about our understanding of the conditions on the ground. My goal during the entire process was to provide unified command and the incident commander with the best information that we had. And at that point, there was concern that these 4 cars had been in a pool fire and that the pressure relief valve had failed, and there was concern about the pressure in the cars.
In terms of the decision to vent and burn the vinyl chloride, which is what caused the massive plume of smoke and the rather extraordinary sight of an American city essentially on fire, among the decision makers that were engaged in that process, did anyone disagree with the recommendation to vent and burn the vinyl chloride from all 5 tank cars?
Sir, my understanding is Unified Command was aligned around that decision, and that decision was based solely on the safety of that community.
Ms. Homendy, what are the alternatives to venting and burning, and what are the risks involved in the venting and burning procedure?
Part of FRA guidance on venting and burning is to look at the alternatives. One is a controlled venting through the valves. In this case, they were melted, so that was not an option. You could do hot tapping, which is essentially cutting a hole in the tank car and draining the liquid, essentially transloading it into another rail car. There are risks to that, and then there's the vent and burn.
Mr. Shaw, Ms. Homendy testified earlier today that the locomotive that was involved in this derailment was immediately or almost immediately put into service on another train, and so the video was not available for examination. Did that happen, and why? I have to admit, hearing that, both Senator Cantwell and I looked at each other and thought that was a really bizarre thing to hear. So is that true, and if so, why?
Senator, my understanding is that 15 minutes of video are available, time before, during, and immediately after the derailment. My understanding is we followed protocols.
Mr. Shaw, I asked you to answer the question I asked. Is it true the locomotive was very shortly thereafter put into service and the result was significant portions of the video were missing?
Senator, at some point after, and it sounds like it was shortly after it was put in service. I don't have the details. I'm happy to follow up.
All right. Well, let me just say, anytime there is a locomotive involved in a serious derailment, it is lunacy that video is not preserved and that locomotive is put into alternative service. So that, I feel confident we could get unanimity on this committee on that. Let me ask also, there's a lot of discussion about Command Central having the wayside detectors and the conductor and the engineer not having information. This particular tank car, has Norfolk Southern examined whether it had triggered previous wayside detectors either on this train or in other circumstances?
So I believe that's part of the NTSB investigation.
Has Norfolk Southern examined that? Do you know if it had triggered previous wayside detectors?
I am not aware that it did.
Ms. Homendy, do you have any information on this, or do we have some confidence that we will be able to get the answer to that at some point?
I'll provide you that answer. What we do have is that it had not reached the critical threshold that is set by Norfolk Southern until that third one.
Yeah, I'm certainly interested not just in the critical threshold, but the trending analysis and the shift that is less than the critical threshold, but could well indicate a problem before the derailment.
We're also interested in that as well.
Okay, final question. Mr. Shaw, I'm sure you heard Ms. Allison's testimony, which was powerful. She raised a very simple question about moms that are concerned about their kids. She described her 7-year-old who was afraid for his own health and safety. What is your answer to her and to other moms who are afraid for their health and safety in this community, and who, as she described, may not be able to move, may not be able to sell their house because their home prices have dropped? What is your answer tonight? What should she tell her child, her 7-year-old child, tonight? And what should other moms in that circumstance tell their kids tonight?
Senator, I'm terribly sorry for the impact that this has had on the community, and I know that it's been traumatic. I was there during the vent and burn, and I saw this plume, and I know what it looked like. There's ongoing testing by the EPA, the Ohio EPA, and the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. They all show that the air is safe and the water is safe to breathe. There's millions of data points. There is still enormous concern within the community about 3 long-term issues. One is long-term health care, one is about property valuations, as you noted, and one is ongoing water monitoring. And so Norfolk Southern is working with relevant stakeholders, which include state and local authorities, on setting up funds to cover all three of those.
How many families were impacted?
Senator, there are 4,700 approximately folks in East Palestine, and then there's some who are impacted in Western Pennsylvania as well.
So you had said earlier in your testimony that you've spent to date, if I got the number right, $24 million. You also noted 6,000 families altogether. Doing quick math, that's about $4,000 per family. Do you agree with Ms. Allison's testimony that home prices have dropped significantly, and if there's a mom scared for her kids, that she right now doesn't have any great options?
Yeah, Senator, I understand your point. Our contributions to date are just the start, and what we're offering through the Family Assistance Center is that folks want to relocate, we will pay for the relocation fees. Our Family Assistance Center has been open since the day after the derailment.
So I want to understand you correctly. You're saying if a family in East Palestine wants to move, that Norfolk Southern will pay the cost of their moving, and will you also make them whole if they try to sell their house and they can get substantially less for it than they could have before this derailment?
Senator, what I'm saying is that they want to leave their house for a while. We will pay for those relocation fees, and we are working with relevant stakeholders in a long-term fund for the property value assurance.
So you'll put them up in a motel or hotel temporarily, but you're not assisting with moving? I just want to understand what you're doing right now.
Right now, we are putting them up in a hotel and paying for food and clothing if needed. And we're also working with relevant stakeholders on a long-term fund for property valuation.
Well, let me say this, Mr. Shaw. You've said multiple times you want to make it right. Let me encourage you, make it right is a real commitment. And this committee expects Norfolk Southern to do exactly that. These people and these families matter.
Well, thank you, Senator Cruz. That concludes our hearing. I thank all the witnesses for participating today. I ask unanimous consent that these letters from the East Palestine residents regarding the impact of derailment be entered into the record, and without objection, it'll be so ordered. The hearing will be open for 2 weeks. The committee will be accepting comments on the Brown-Vance legislation and other proposals to advance rail safety. The senators will have until Wednesday, the 5th of April at noon, to submit questions for the record to the committee. Witnesses will have 2 weeks to respond to those questions. Hold on. Okay, we're standing with those dates. The committee is adjourned.
All right, now I can hear myself. How many times is he going to say I'm sorry? Mr. Shaw, you can say I'm sorry all you want, but that really doesn't cut it. Every one of these hearings they have, his first words out of his mouth is, I'm sorry this has happened. Okay. It's just ridiculous. The more of these we have, the more that comes out. More information comes out. It's kind of interesting. The NTSB, I kind of think they're kind of, with reading their preliminary report, I think they're almost taking the train company's side on this. So I don't know how much they're gonna, they may support this stuff, but doesn't mean it's gonna get passed. It's interesting. And and then again, he brings up the incident commander and the incident, we still have yet to know, who was all in there. He just can't seem to answer that question. I mean, he threw the fire chief and DeWine under the bus the other day, and I don't know about you, but if I was thrown under the bus and accused of making a decision that impacted the whole town, I would be out there to defend myself if I didn't make that decision. And I've seen nothing released from the chief yet saying different. So it kind of makes me think, I don't know. Every one of these is it's nuts. His assistance center, I know people's been turned away. They want you to pay for, the just room yourself, and then they'll reimburse you if they think it's right. Turn myself down. It's a little loud in my ear. But people's been turned away. But, there's also been people that have tried to get reimbursed for their freaking cigarettes and beer and, shit like that, which unfortunately, that had nothing to do with the train derailment. So I've heard a couple stories of people trying to get reimbursed for stuff like that. So I don't know. We'll see where this goes. The more and more it goes, he's Mr. Shaw is just playing a game right now. That's what he's doing. He's just I find kind of interesting. He was a here that day. Did he want to see, what would happen? The decision that he made, what it looked like. Is that why he was here that day? I found that kind of interesting too. A chemical plant just blew up in Pasadena, Texas. Wow. It's blowing up everywhere. It's nuts. All right, guys. That was kind of long, but I like watching them because, new info comes out. But we can see how, worried that committee was, because by the time the committee was over, there was, 2 people left in the room from the committee. If that was me, I'd want to sit and listen to the whole thing, but, that's government for you, so. I don't think I ever really knew. We have multiple groups bringing in lots of supplies this weekend. I've seen a lot of groups post they're coming in this weekend. That youth meeting that was supposed to take place on Tuesday, they moved it to Saturday, and they actually moved it to in town, which is really great because, Canfield's like maybe about 30 minutes from here, depending on traffic, 30, 45 minutes. So at least they moved it to in town, so it is Saturday, so I will, cover that. But I'm glad they moved it in town, so maybe we'll have maybe more, kids are able to show up. Other than that, let's see, you said this to me. Oops, I just clicked on it. Holy cow, that's one heck of an explosion. Wow. That's nuts. So, we'll see where this goes. I would definitely get, I'll get footage of the tracks. If you ask for it, I will get it. Anytime you want footage, if I'm able to get it, I will get it. That is a pretty good idea, just to, check them out. I have to, just watch where I go, because I'm not a, the train company's not a fan of mine right now. They probably hate me, so I'll just have to watch where I go with it. But I will get the footage. And that is a good idea. We check some of that stuff out. I think that's about it. I think I'm gonna end that because we're going on over 3 hours. So, I'll probably be on tonight because there is so much stuff I want to cover. And they keep on having these hearings, and it takes up time. So, but thank you guys for joining me. I will. I was like, what the heck was that? Maybe we'll hit some news tonight. I'd seen they put up the water tanks in the town, and I guess it's for, because we're supposed to have rain this week, and how they're. Oh, I think my camera froze probably. Yep, it did. I figured. It always does. I don't have the other one set up. I had to use my old one. Last time it rained, we had that flood and the dam was breached, and that was how it was supposed to work. Well, I guess not, because they put water tanks in this time to pump the water into, so it don't breach the dams. So I guess they didn't work how they were supposed to. I didn't think they would, because nobody would ever give me an answer. What was the point of the dam being overflowed? But we get the new tanks in. I don't know if they're going to be like a permanent fixture, or it's just till they're done cleaning up. Time for a rental car, yeah. Well, they have to trespass me first before they charge me with trespassing. So, I can get yelled at and get trespassed from it. As long as I don't go back, they can't charge me. Because I would fight that in court. Yeah, I don't know if they're going to be a permanent fixture, or they're just till they're done cleaning up. I have no idea. They did put them up quick, though, I have to say. They were trying to beat this rain, I guess, from the news article. I was wondering what they were for. I seen, when I was down there the other day, they only had 2 panels of the first one put up. So within, a day and a half, 2 days, they had them all put up, which is, pretty amazing. But I don't know if they worked around the clock maybe on it. Maybe they worked 24 hours overnight. But it's pretty amazing. Soil, we still got piles of soil here. They've moved 180 tons more, I think, within the last week or something like that. It's not much. Nobody wants the soil. Indiana supposedly did their test on it, and they said it's safe. But they're not moving that soil out. They have it in a pile, covered up with plastic, which basically is, it's baking that soil. Plastic is like a greenhouse. When the sun hits it, it's going to heat it up. So it's baking that soil. And I've seen a couple posts of people saying, smell's been going up some. Well, probably because they're, basically baking that soil, and, different toxins and different temperatures, degrade at different rates. So they're making the temperature higher there. So you're probably getting more, degrading of the toxins in that soil. Maybe that's their purpose. Maybe their purpose is to get that soil down to where it's at a reasonable level so somebody will take it. I don't know. I just don't get why, they seem to have been able to move all the liquid just fine. It's the soil they have problems getting rid of. So maybe it's their purpose. Maybe they are trying to degrade that soil down so it tests a little safer. I don't know. I have no idea what their intentions are now. But all right, I'm going to get off here. I'll see you guys later on tonight. We'll just cover some stuff that some more of the private testing that comes out that kind of throws the EPA's testing into the trash. We'll cover some of that. just a couple other things I would have covered. My dog's going to bark now. He's seen me move. All right, I'm going to get off here, guys. So it's been 3.5 hours. I'm going to go eat. My dog is barking. He probably wants to go outside. But I'll catch you guys later. Thank you guys for tuning in. I'll continue to cover these as long as they go on, because as the more they go on, the more I learn, because the more that comes out. And it's kind of interesting. The train audio got over. They put the train back in service, so their video got cleared, which I'm guessing probably includes radio traffic that they probably didn't want heard. I'm guessing. They supplied 15 minutes of it, but what 15 minutes did you just supply? So I found that kind of interesting too. That's kind of odd, but hey, it's a train company. All right. We'll cover that. We'll talk about that later on tonight. We'll get into that. I'm going to go get something to eat. My butt hurts from sitting here. But I wanted to see what this hearing came out of. I'm sure Pennsylvania is probably going to call him back, I imagine. Pennsylvania. I don't know why Ohio just ain't doing anything. It's just Pennsylvania's on the ball, but I guess follow the money. All right, guys. I will talk to you guys later. We'll cover some stuff tonight. Try to get caught up with some stuff. Or not. Okay. Thank you for tuning in. I'll see you guys later.